would like to say thank you for everybody who is joining us here today. We should be starting in about 10-15 minutes. Thank you for being very patient.
Buenas tardes. Para las personas que necesitan traducción de inglés a español, afuera hay una mesa. Ahí pueden acercarse para que les den unos audífonos y una cajita para que les traduzcan. Gracias.
Testing, testing.
Yeah, it's just a squeeze. I think Aileen. Right here in the corner? Yeah. Good to see you, man. Yeah. John. Oh, sorry. Let's go over. No, that's the way it is. We just tight. And maybe I want to change names. I don't know.
I'm gonna push you off the edge.
I'd make room for you, but I'd go over.
Push you off the edge here.
Yeah, well, time me.
You can scoot over a little bit more this way. You're too apart to the edge.
I'm good. I'm afraid I'm going to screw up the microphones.
I don't think there's any. Oh yeah, you got him over there at the edge.
I get tired myself. I haven't checked on it if you got it, but I think it's on it. Well, somebody was asking to include Daniel and Mom with an SD5. Yeah? No, it's a 1925. It's only because
Do we have a hot mic here?
yeah, next. So we're in good shape. Very good shape. But no, I mean it is correct.
Nothing but a G thing.
Double G. Double G.
G square.
Good little crowd.
They've been patient running about an hour late.
Yeah, you can't have it both ways. But more power to you. Nice to meet you.
So you're flying to San Diego?
Ready? Ready?
Your hood.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. If those of you who are outside the room will please take your seats if you're going to join us. Those who have been waiting patiently, thank you so much for doing so. I'll begin by saying thank you for joining us on a Friday afternoon. You could be, I could think of many other places that we could be at, but we are here in Imperial County for the Joint Legislative Committee on Climate Change Policies and the Assembly Committee on Natural Resources. I'll begin by acknowledging my colleague to my right, your left, Cristina Garcia, Assembly Member, who chairs the Assembly Committee on Natural Resources, a committee that is extremely important to today's conversation, both opportunities at the Salton Sea and the implementation of Assembly Bill 617, which she authored, that pertains to air quality being at the center of our climate change policies in California moving forward. This last 2 days, we've had the opportunity to have to have some very extensive discussions on the work that's being done here in Imperial County as it relates to air monitoring systems and the work being done here locally by Comité Cívico del Valle. And what we've identified is that there is a tremendous amount of information and work that's been done here locally that could be looked upon by other regions of the state of California and utilized as models in helping us address our air quality issues throughout the state. At the same time, we've had the opportunity to take not only my colleague but other members of the Sacramento community, both business, the environment community, and other decision-making agencies to see firsthand the challenges that are before us at the border, the challenges that exist at the Salton Sea. With that, I'd like to, again, call this meeting to order and pass the microphone to my colleague to say a few words, and we'll jump right into the first panel, Challenges and Opportunities of Salton Sea, after that.
Thank you, Assemblymember Garcia and everyone that's here today. When I've been in the Assembly for the last 5 years, so I guess I get to be the senior member between the two of us. And for the last 5 years, I've been talking about making sure our policies on the environment are equitable. And when Eddie got to the legislature, he continued to have that same voice, both of us from different experiences, but I think our goals were the same. And as the work continued on climate change this last cycle, we had that common goal to make sure that clean air was not lost in the discussion. For the 5 years I was in the legislature, and when Eddie got there in the following 3 years, it was always this idea that the clean air piece would just kind of get taken care of. It was just going to get done somehow. It would follow suit. There would be lots of different co-benefits when we were talking about greenhouse gases. And it was my experience, along with Eddie's, that we couldn't wait and hope that it would just happen. We needed to be intentional about that. We needed to elevate that, and we needed to make sure that we took the opportunity with the reinstating or the extension of cap and trade to ensure that this time it happened for reals. And so when we started the work at the beginning of the year, clean air was a priority. And as it became a priority for the legislature, we started to see what are the models out there? Where do we have examples? And a lot of it was we're going to be starting new, and there are not a lot of examples, but there were examples, including the work that's being done here. A lot of monitoring, a lot of discussion around clean air in this area, a lot of what happens at the Salton Sea and how we manage that and how it has health effects. And so there were already some role models here in this area to start to guide some of the work that we did through AB 617. I think today being here, reaffirms that commitment, but it also lets us know that we have a bigger challenge. We can't just be monitoring, and we can't just say that we have these hotspots or these communities of interest that we have identified for a long time. We know about the Salton Sea, we know about the Southeast out there, but we need to make sure that we have deliverables, and that through this monitoring, through these plans, we have real measurements of change, and we have real change that comes through that. And so that's a challenge that we have, but I think being here today allows us to figure out what we do know and how we move forward from that to make sure that we have not just data, but that we have action behind with that data and that it's informing us. And more importantly, that it's data and it's community action plans that are community-driven. And so I think we're changing the paradigm from telling folks these are your problems and these are your solutions to allowing folks to do what they already know, identify their problems, and work with us to come up with solutions that make sense to them and are going to work well in their communities, which I think which is what's special about. I already had heard about the different things here, but being out here today, hearing individuals about the work they're doing, reminds us that it is possible, we can be successful, and we can have a partnership and trust, and that's how we're going to get real solutions down the road. Thank you.
Thank you, Assembly Member. We want to just remind everyone that this hearing is being live streamed, and you can connect to the link via the committee websites. And so, again, thank you all for being here, and there are a tremendous amount of other individuals that are tuning in and following the conversation as well. I just wanted to acknowledge that. We'll jump into our first panel, and the conversation is Challenges and Opportunities of the Salton Sea. We have Kay Lee. I've known Kay Lee for 2 years, and I'm still struggling with his name. Kaylee Bright. And I also want to recognize the gentlemen all wearing ties over here to the right. Thank you for the formality. He represents California Natural Resources Agency. Jose Angel is with the California Regional Water Quality Control Board. Kevin Cali with the Imperial Irrigation District, and John Hernandez is our senior assembly member, California Senior Legislature. And it says to say senior. I didn't want to say that, but it says it here, man. And so we'll have Kaylee begin the conversation, and we'll jump right next to the next speaker.
Great. Thank you. So thank you, Mr. Chair and Madam Chair. I think first it should be really kind of recognized that we are in a room with a lot of people who are new to the Salton Sea, and I think so many new faces from different parts of the state is a real testament to the work that you guys have been doing in the legislature to build support for this issue over the last 3, 5, 10 years. Oh, sorry. How's that? Okay. So, extreme kudos for the work that everyone in this room and to the legislative leadership and Mr. Garcia for building this coalition of support that is beyond the Imperial and Coachella Valleys and really extends throughout the legislature and to other regions of the state. So we have a lot to celebrate right now, and I wanted to walk through a few of those pieces. But then I also wanted to focus in on the needs that we need to put more focus on, because it's nice to pat yourself on the back, but we're not really at a point to pat ourselves on the back until we can actually get there and do that in front of a project delivered on the ground and providing habitat and air quality. We have a 10-year plan that has been very well received across the core, I'll call them the core stakeholders. It's been well received throughout the communities around the sea. There's some work to do to bring everyone into that plan, but we have been pushing very hard to set a vision for a sustainable Salton Sea that takes advantage of the gifts that we have right now and puts forward a plan for the next 10 years that really we can be held accountable to meeting by laying out clear milestones and deliverables and projects. You know, I see there are a lot of new people in this room to this issue, so I wanted to just give a kind of a brief primer on the Salton Sea, and I think I can do it really quickly. You know, as we were on the tour, we saw the Salton Sea region is a very, very flat region. We're blessed that it is a downhill region from the outlets of water from the agricultural fields. We are also blessed that there is a considerable amount of water that flows from those agricultural fields towards the Salton Sea. So under any scenario, we are given a circumstance where we have many hundred thousands of acre feet of water that it's incumbent upon us to manage, and we need to manage that water in ways that both provide public health benefit and provide habitat for the critical flyway that goes right over the Salton Sea. And, you know, the point being on the area is that, you know, what we have water, but we have lots of distance between the water outlets and where the water needs to go to provide these benefits. And the work we are going to do in the 10-year plan is centered around maximizing the ability of that water to travel the furthest distances as possible. It involves some fairly heavy construction around containment ponds. Then it also involves pretty light construction and nimble, you know, habitat development where we can, and then it also involves some air quality work. So it's a series of pushing water across a big flat area and then pushing it into holding areas to provide benefits for birds, public health, and other things as we identify in the plan. So, you know, to develop this plan, we faced a lot of false assumptions. We faced a kind of a public sentiment a few years ago that said nobody will support this project outside of the areas that are directly impacted. I think we've been proven wrong by that, looking at this room and looking at the legislative success that we continue to have every time the Salton Sea is put forward in the legislature. We also faced this kind of nagging sentiment that the projects are just you can't fix this problem, and we've been able to demonstrate with the plan that yes you can, and it's not all that complicated. It takes quite a bit of money, and it takes some real commitment from policymakers, program managers, and locals to get this stuff done. We have been blessed by a clear pathway provided by the legislature on both permitting and contracting. We have the Salton Sea was the first water project in the state to get design build contracting authority, which is a very wonky insider way of saying expedited contracting authority, so that we can design and build at the same time as we roll these projects out. It was a huge step, and it was a first for these types of projects. We also have a fairly clear permitting pathway to move these projects forward. We have done extensive CEQA work through prior planning efforts that we're able to lean on for these projects, so we're not facing a permitting hurdle in the traditional sense where environmental permitting is getting in the way of progress at the sea. We have very strong local partnerships with the major stakeholders that depend on that live around the Salton Sea and depend on the water that flows through the Colorado. And we are gaining stronger partnerships across the lower basin states who also are starting to recognize the Salton Sea as a linchpin to the water security of their states. That is very important because with that commitment and with that buy-in from those states, you get cooperation that can help us down the road on projects and a shared understanding of why this is important. And we have a tremendous opportunity, most importantly, in proving ourselves in these next few years with funding. Getting the first $80 million in Prop 1 was a huge victory, and I honestly thought we would, at best, maybe inch above that funding in the latest bond conversations. But as everyone here knows, the chair and the administration were able to push well beyond, and we're now looking at a funding package that gets us almost all the way there to the complete funding for the first 10 years. So now we have a program that has group buy-in, that it's feasible, and that it's sustainable. We have a funding package that can make it happen on the ground. We have the local partnerships and the major stakeholders that can support us in that effort, but we're still lacking the most important piece, which is getting something on the ground. We have projects are starting. Red Hill Bay has started. We have earth moving. We have done the request for qualifications on species conservation habitat. There's a lot of different tracks of contracting that are moving forward right now, but it doesn't. Our goodwill is not built by contracting pathways that aren't fully completed. So we are pushing very hard to make sure that these pathways deliver something on the ground for the residents around the sea to see. We have. I think it's really important to talk about the air monitoring, because we will be judged by the effectiveness of our programs to keep the dust from blowing on the playa to the communities around it. We have a fairly strong system of air monitoring stations that are around the sea that we'll talk about later. But it shouldn't be passed over that the importance of the work that Comité Cívico del Valle is doing with the community air monitoring, because this is really, really genuinely innovative citizen science that in order for it to be successful, you need to have buy-in from all of the regulatory community, and seeing that collaboration between state regulators and the nonprofit sector and the communities really, puts a blueprint out there for how we can keep us accountable for the work that we do over the next 10 years. I'll kind of end here because I'm going on and on. The things we need to do better job of. We really need to learn how to integrate community, and the government does a good job of setting up workshops where we go and tell people what we're going to do, and we have done that extensively throughout the region. But we have an opportunity with this project to bring tremendous investment of resources to the valley, And we have an opportunity to engage a lot of youth and a lot of recent college grads, a lot of high school students into these projects that could expose them to careers in biology, engineering, science, education. And I think we really need to focus on building a capacity around these projects to really take advantage of all the benefits that are going to come into the valley from them. And to do that, that's one of the places where we've been sorely lacking, and we have a commitment to try to work on that over time. And something that I want you to please hold us to as we move along with the project. So with that, I'll pass on to the next one. Thank you.
How's this? Okay. Honorable Madam Chair, that has a nice ring to it. Garcia, Chairman Garcia, and members of the audience. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to provide information on this hearing. I am the Executive Officer of the Regional Water Quality Control Board. I am not a recovering regulator. I'm an active regulator. My job today, if I may, is going to fall into three categories. I'm going to focus my remarks on my board's role in relationship to the efforts and management program for the Salton Sea, the water quality challenges it faces, their nexus to the exposed playa, and the Natural Resources Agency's management program, and the road ahead for us, some of the things that we believe that are going to have to happen in the future. Let me start with putting regulatory context, and Mr. Bright alluded to some of the unique features of the Salton Sea. It's along the Pacific Flyway. The slide that you're looking at right now gives you a sense of not just location, but extent of the sea. It also shows its relationship to the U.S. border. That's good and that's bad. I'll talk a little bit about that. And also shows its relationship to the Pacific Ocean. I'm going to zoom now into what we call the Salton Sea watershed. It is the priority watershed for cleanup purposes for my board. It covers over 8,000 square miles. 9 point source pollution sources pose the greatest threat to water quality. That to us means agricultural runoff. And the other issue that is relevant here is that it's a transboundary watershed. That means that we get flows from Mexico. We're downhill from Mexico, for that matter. So we get approximately 100,000 acre feet, a little bit less, give or take, any given year, of water from Mexico. My board is charged with, by the Protocol on Water Quality Control Act, with controlling water quality in the region. It does so typically through the issuance of permits. We call them waste discharge requirements for anyone that discharges waste that could threaten the water quality. It also adopts and develops water quality standards to protect beneficial uses of the waters of the state. We work also with other agencies when it comes to development of water quality policy and coordination of policy. Regarding the Salton Sea Management Program, we view our role, and we have played a supportive role to the Salton Sea Management Program. We provide regulatory guidance to the Natural Resources Agency. Down the road, we are going to roll up our sleeves and start developing additional water quality regulations to make sure that the newly created habitat is sustainable from a water quality perspective. We certainly don't want to end up where we're beginning, where the habitat is degraded and is going to have to be dried up to deal with the pollution. So I'm going to cover a little bit of that also. Let me start with the main challenges that we face from a regulatory perspective. The fact that the Salton Sea is a closed basin That's a challenge in itself. It has no outlet for the salts and some of the other pollutants that tend to concentrate in it. That means that the typical regulatory approach doesn't work here. It's not that my board or other regulatory agencies are shying away from the responsibility to promulgate and enforce water quality standards. But we cannot solve the salinity problem, which is, in my opinion, the main water quality problem of the Salton Sea, notwithstanding the exposed playa, from a regulatory perspective. Because even if we were to develop, let's say, a standard where we ask people to discharge waste that do not have a concentration of more than 1,000 parts per million of salts, eventually it would get saltier with time. So again, the typical regulatory approach doesn't work in this case, hence the Salton Sea Management Program, hence engineering projects to deal with that problem. The other challenge is that we need to be realistic and recognize that the main source of inflows into the Salton Sea is agricultural runoff. There is value in the agricultural runoff, but we also need to be cognizant that it is a wastewater in one form or another. The third one, obviously, is that the sea is shrinking. It was water and water transfers, water quality and water transfers that brought us to this point. The lack of sufficient water, I suppose, from some people's perspective. And that obviously is causing the shrinkage, some of the water transfers, and so that exposes the playa. What I wanted to discuss is our perception and how we view the Salton Sea Management Program. The Salton Sea Management Program is based on what some of us call adaptive management. We don't have all the data that we need to make all the decisions down the road, but we know we have sufficient information to start getting with some of the key infrastructure to start addressing some of the critical issues facing the Salton Sea. Now, that translates into relying on structural controls. Those are projects on the ground, engineering projects typically. But it also relies on non-structural controls, and in fact, it takes non-structural controls for granted. And that's a euphemism to talk about regulation. So that's where my board comes into play. As newly created habitat ensues, the expectation is going to be that what goes into the newly created habitat is going to be cleaner than it is right now. My fundamental concern is that we don't have a master plan yet. I'm not suggesting that we should wait for a master plan to start addressing some of the exposed playa, but in order for us to develop sensible and targeted controls, it helps when we have project definition. And we have, and the Natural Resources Agency, the Imperial Irrigation District, and others are taking the right step in that direction with some of the backbone infrastructure that is going to enable us to develop additional controls to target and make sure that we have sustainable habitat. When I mean sustainable habitat, I'm talking primarily about close to 20,000 acres or so, perhaps a little bit more, of shallow water-based habitat for some of the birds and so forth. So here's the other challenge, and some of you early this morning, I understand, stopped by the new port of the east port of entry, the west port of entry. I'm sorry, had lunch very late. We get, like I said, approximately 80 or so thousand acre-feet per year of water from Mexico via the New River. We neither have control over the quantity nor the quality. We don't have jurisdiction in Mexico. We view addressing New River pollution from Mexico a federal responsibility. And quite frankly, the need in Mexico is greater than the available resources, so that has always been a struggle, in spite of the significant water quality gains that we have made with Mexico during the last 10 years. So I'm going to wrap it up in about a couple of minutes just by sharing with you and the audience what we foresee for the next 10, 15 years in terms of my board's involvement. Again, I believe we're going to have to develop and implement additional water quality control regulations. These regulations, make no mistake about it, they're going to kick back primarily to the farming community. And we're going to have to thread a very careful, it's a balancing act. It's going to be a balancing act. It is wastewater in one form or another, and there's a breaking point where we're going to reach diminishing returns. It's going to cost money to implement, and we need to find a sweet spot. How clean is clean enough to sustain the newly created habitat while we continue to maintain its thriving agricultural industry? That is a very difficult proposition, but I will say this, not because I'm trying to humor some of the members of the audience. We have a very good working relationship with the farming community. I can tell you that we did not start with a very good working relationship, but they have, for the last 12 years or so, been implementing a valley-wide regulatory program that addresses the silt that comes off the fields, and indirectly they address also the nutrients, because some of these nutrients bound to the silt that comes off the field, and indirectly they also address some of the pesticides, insoluble pesticides, because they also attach to the silt that comes from the fields. And they have, we have enjoyed over 97% participation rate from the farming community. So we're going to leverage that good working relationship as we charge ahead with some additional controls to try to find the sweet spot, the balancing act. Thirdly, as we move forward with some of these efforts, we're also going to have to amend what we call our water quality control plan for the region. The water quality control plan is the regulation that establishes the water quality protection standards for the Salton Sea, also the beneficial uses. As the sea shrinks, we're losing beneficial uses. We're going to gain them in some other locations. They're going to be in some other form, in some other location through the Salton Sea Management Program. It is going to be a technical challenge, let me say, to say the least. It's also a very detailed, time-extensive, resource-intensive endeavor. If everything goes well, we're looking at about an average one amendment per year. I anticipate we're going to need at least a dozen as the Salton Sea Management Program gains full steam. I'm not asking for additional resources. I'm just trying to measure expectations and let you know that the road ahead from a regulatory perspective is going to be a bit bumpy. I know my board is not going to shy away from its responsibility, but we're going to have to work very closely with our farming community here in the Imperial Valley and also in the Coachella Valley to make sure that what we ask them to do, number one, is achievable. Second, that they can get it done and remain in business. That always weighs heavily on my board's mind. Again, I want to thank you for the opportunity to provide this information, and I'll be available to answer questions you may have.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. So, am I right that we were waiting for everybody to get back from the Salton Sea? You went out and visited the Salton Sea, and your tour operator, his name wasn't Gilligan, was it? I guess you're too young. We do at IID. We've done quite a few of these Salton Sea tours, and we always have to add, an hour and a half just travel time. But I'm sure that you were struck, as I have often been, by the sheer size of the Salton Sea. Salton Sea is about 33, 34 miles long, about 15 miles wide at its widest point. It is immense. And I think that a lot of the the trouble that we experienced early on in getting people outside Imperial and Coachella Valleys to care about the Salton Sea is that it seems so far away. I see a lot of people I know from Sacramento, and I'm happy to say that in all of the battles we've fought at IID and with our partner Imperial County on the Salton Sea, that we are on the verge, I think, of a workable plan, and I expect the State Water Board to act on it as early as this Tuesday. Now, I know that there are probably people in this audience who believe that the only real way to definitively deal with this problem at the Salton Sea, which is a shrinking lake, is to import water from somewhere else. And I just want everyone to know that IID has no opposition to that at all. But it is a longer-term plan, and it's one that we cannot let stand in the way of a going-forward plan for the next 10 years. Because the Salton Sea is going to shrink. It is already shrinking. And that die was cast 15 years ago when these nation's largest agricultural to urban water transfers began. I commend Comite Civico and other community-based organizations for helping to galvanize local focus on this problem. But make no mistake, the responsibility for the Salton Sea, as we see it, rests with the state of California, and that ensued from the moment we began transferring this water to the coast. So I don't think that an imported water solution is outside the realm of possibility, but I can't count on it. So the lake is already shrinking. It's what do we do to make sure that it doesn't make people sick? And I think the best thing we can do is to build projects out there, habitat and air, and to do it, methodically, deliberately, and quickly. And if we fall short, and certainly IID will stands ready to assist in any way, and we will. But if we fall short, there's a remedy to catch up. So it's a performance-based 10-year plan, and it's in all our interests for it to work. Because what the Salton Sea needs most right now is a modicum of success. If you just, sort of buy into the notion that this is an intractable problem that just defies government's ability to solve it, then you're ignoring how big that lake is and how much damage it could do. So the first thing you have to do is you have to make people care. And I would submit to you that the reason people care is because these water transfers are inextricably tied to the problem at the Salton Sea. So I think you can do both. I think this 10-year plan provides a pathway to do both. And I thank this governor for doing more at the Salton Sea than either of his predecessors. And I certainly thank the two assembly members for their leadership. And I'd be open to any questions.
All right, Mr. Hernandez.
Muchas gracias por venir. Assembly Member Garcia, thank you for coming and listening to the community down here. And thank you, all government officials, including the Imperial Irrigation District and Natural Resources and Water Quality, for listening to a voice of the community that definitely has a stake in the future of life and as we know it down here in this valley. You know, I had a 50th year class reunion about a week ago, and it takes me back 50 years to how it used to be. And you all know, you've seen the pictures, the movies, and how the sea was and how there was life. So we want to expedite this restoration. We want the state, the public utilities, the county, the cities to work together, because in essence they're the same constituent base that we, the community, are. We are the ones that participate in all those levels, so we want you to work with us at those levels. Yes, the problem was exacerbated by the water transfer and the qualification settlement agreement, and it's going to accelerate, but it's been a sump. And the problems haven't been properly addressed for all this period, so there has to be more skin in the game from all participants that damaged that sump and want to bring it together. So people know who they are that participated in that, and I don't have to say names or point, but people have to accept responsibility at all levels. I mean, it was a rude awakening when 15 years ago, 17 years ago, the federal government said, if you don't transfer water, we're going to take it and you're not going to be compensated for it. So the rude awakening now is that the data is here, it's clear, it's affecting life, it's killing birds. Pretty soon it's going to start killing people. Do we have to wait? Like we do in a lot of other situations, and when, you know, something deadly happens before everybody unifies and gets action going? We know that field burning is causing problems. Why can't the state start moving forward with banning burning in this county where we have the baddest air? And yes, we need to work with Mexico in getting that done. So it'll be a collaborative effort because both sides can do it. I mean, we have family and friends on both sides of the border that definitely want the same thing for their future. You know, restrict the limit of off-road vehicles on the western side of our county. The fugitive dust, we know it's there. We know what's causing it. We don't want to just eliminate people having fun, recreation, off-roading, but let's look at ways to restrict it to certain areas. I had an opportunity to be invited to San Diego to see the desal plant and see the work that they're doing with, I don't know if they call it toilet to tap or reclaimed water. You know, the technology is already there for desal. The technology is already there for reclaiming water. Our communities are hurting because of the high cost of sewer services to clean up water. And what happened to our community? You know, 50 years ago, as I mentioned, the population base was different. Yes, it was a red state, a red county. And now it's 2-to-1 blue. So the tide has turned, but the tide at the sea has nowhere to go because there's no outlet, and we're just polluting the heck out of our community. So, you know, the generations that we have of Mexican Americans in this community parallel the generations of farmers that we have in this community. But the generations of Mexicans have multiplied much faster than the farmers in this community. So now the farmers and their kids are marrying Mexican Americans, let's face it. So they want the same thing for their kids that we want for ours. So let's work together with the farming community, the agribusiness community. You know, I don't think I know one Mexican American farmer in my lifetime in this valley, although I know a bunch of them across the border, because I mean they're all Mexicans. But then I know American farmers across the border. I know more American farmers across the border in Mexico than I do know Mexican farmers on this side of the valley. We need to level the playing field, and we all need to put some skin in the game. The skin in the game means funding mechanisms. We need to collaborate. We need to find new ways, creative ways for funding these mechanisms to fix these problems. And there are ways. When you have an economy in California that's probably now today the 5th in the world, a couple of $1 trillion, millions of billions, and we're looking at throwing 80 million. And I know it's not your fault, Assembly people, because you guys were not up here. There was no representation. You wouldn't see a John Hernandez sitting up here 50 years ago, 30 years ago. We saw it probably the tide turned, or Immigration Reform Act of '86. And that's probably why they don't want to do another one, because the numbers are going to go even bigger. So I think what I'm saying is that as the family farms dwindle and agribusiness leaves us with a lot of damage, they have to step up to the plate. I mean, I'm glad to see a representative from CoLab here today. Thank you. And I'm glad to see that she's at least willing to talk and willing to talk to her people. And I've heard the president of the Imperial Valley Vegetable Growers Association says, yeah, I want to work to eliminate field burning. I heard him. Now that's a change. And the story that I talk about, that the president of the Imperial Valley Vegetable Growers Association was the great-grandfather of my granddaughter, only indicates that we want the same thing for our future and for our children. So I urge the assembly members to, find common ground with other lawmakers and expedite this. Garcia and Garcia, where in the heck? We got 2 Garcias and probably 3. I mean, I remember when there were just a few Hernandezes. Now, dang, they're all over the place. But, Cristina, trust this assembly member. 50 years ago, he wasn't around. I don't think he was born, right? But you had grandparents and parents, and you will be, and are already our parents, and you will be grandparents. But if this was caused in 100 years, imagine where we're going to be just in a short period because of what's happening, the birds dying and so forth. So, I don't think that the cost is exorbitant or it's out of the area, out of our reach. The Environmental Protection Agency, the California Water Board, Cal EPA, hold them accountable. There's laws on the books there. We certainly know that there are at the federal level that they're trying to roll back or ignore. So at the state level, believe me, they're there. Some of them aren't being enforced, and some of them people are looking the other way. So I hope that what I'm hearing here from Mr. Jose Angel, and I have no reason to doubt that he's going to find ways to make sure that these projects don't leave us the residuals, that que no sea una cosa que no hay mal que por no ven, que como es el dicho, no hay mal. Help me out, please. ¿Cómo? No hay mal que por bien no venga. So I just thank you for my point of view, but there's other things that can be done quickly here. The state has 2 prisons. Air quality, we can do things within the state jurisdictions and encourage the federal government to move quickly towards renewables in those facilities, bring down emissions, electric vehicles. I think I've heard that the Imperial Irrigation District is trying to get into that stream and electric vehicles, renewables, community solar, geothermal. But we surely don't want the damage that we see that some geothermal groups have done and what they've left behind. We know we have to go outside the area, bring scientists from outside the area to prove our point that we're saying, hey man, something doesn't smell right here. Oh, it's okay, don't worry about it. I've lived here 50 years and hadn't heard me bald-headed and dead in 10 years. I'm sorry, Jose, that wasn't meant for you. So
Sometimes we just have to sit down and take it.
yeah, grin and bear it, like they said, mi tierra. So I just think that there are some things that if we're not going to, wait on the money, then, find creative ways. If those developers are going to come in, let's get some teeth in these renewal developers that are coming in and put, 1,000 megawatts, 2,000 megawatts and pump it out, but mess up our landscape. We have to take another look at the state's Public Utility District Act. It's there, right? Take a look at it. Maybe the local public utilities need some oversight. They got some bad press lately. I don't know if it's true or false, but certainly take a look at it. That's a state. You represent us, so maybe something you might ask questions about. So, the amount of human capital that we've lost in this community over 100 years, if you just stop and think about all my family and friends that have moved out because there's no jobs. And we always talk about, let them come in. Let's slide CEQA and let's expedite, to get jobs, an economic driver. What jobs? Mexicali was created the same time with the same water, using the same Colorado River, 1 million people over there, 20-some institutions of higher education. We still have only one college, one junior college. We got to find and hire engineers and doctors from out of the area. One Mexicano doctor I know in 100 years. Something's wrong. The system is something's wrong in this valley. And like they say, the train is moving down the path and there ain't no getting off because John Hernandez has got some kids and some grandkids and some whole bunch of Mexicanos that are thinking the same way, and that have moved into the LA area, have moved into Washington, D.C., have moved into other parts of the country that want nothing better than a better quality of life. And then when I'm no longer able to sit up here and voice my opinions and push for solutions, believe me, I'll certainly be setting the example so that they will. So I'm glad to see some educators too. San Diego State. I'm sure he's listening. Why we spend money on training solar installers, because solar is the future, and then they're done after 6 months of their project and they got to go work in Texas or where are they working right now? In Texas, and they're working in Minnesota, because I know these guys. Here. I just heard that the solar panels that Sun Solar is going to put on people's rooftops are being manufactured in Mexicali. We need, real sustainable employment, better education opportunities, and everybody works together. So, we don't want to send our waste as a result of this to Compton, Buttonwillow, L.A. area. And we don't want L.A. to send it to us either in Westmoreland. So if people are creating waste because of economic development and so forth, whether it's here or whether it's another part of the state, they should find ways to take care of their own and not ship it to other communities and have impacts on other communities, expensive one to the other. So I think that another thing is that the state education code, or if there's a law needed, if there's communities that are in non-attainment because of the air quality, well, let's have a law or a policy that school districts must take action and mitigate to help those students that suffer from asthma during those periods when the air quality is, that's not hard to do. We went to schools in this Ivan project I was working with, and they just refused to provide the information. Why? They didn't want, even a school here in Calexico, they just didn't want people to know. Why? When we're trying to save lives. So, I just could go on and on because I've lived a lot of this stuff, but I'm glad to see Cristina Garcia, Eduardo Garcia, a Latino caucus, an attorney general, Speaker of the Senate, assembly member, que me entienden, que me escuchan y que me ayuden a prolongar no nomás la vida mía, pero la vida de los demás. Gracias.
Thank you, John. I know you have about 6 more pages of constructive critique, equal opportunity critique, I would say, of the current situation here in Imperial County. And I will tell you that
I had some from Mataka, but he left, didn't he?
I have a tremendous amount of appreciation for you touching on all of the subjects that you have, to highlighting both to those who visit from afar and reminding those of us who are here on a daily basis what the challenges are before us. I want to let my colleagues say a few comments as well. I'd like to spend maybe 5 or 10 minutes just asking some questions before we move on to the next panel. But my first will be to Kevin, and then I'll pass the mic over and we can just take them in that fashion. Kevin, you talked a little bit about the water importation concept, and in the district we have a lot of individuals who believe that we ought to be spending our time, energy, and resources on focusing on water importation to the Salton Sea, and you kind of touched a little bit on it, but I think this is the appropriate forum to kind of elaborate a little more on that, because there are some people that are just adamantly, opposed to the implementation of a 10-year plan and saying we're putting a Band-Aid on a huge wound, and there may be some actual truth to that, in the extent that the problem before us requires a much greater, surgical, solution versus just a temporary emergency room visit and here you go and come back and tell us how you feel situation. But can you kind of elaborate on that? And then I'm going to pass the mic over to my colleague so that she can pose any questions or comments she may want to share about the speakers that just presented.
When ID filed its petition with the state board almost 3 years ago, we argued for a comprehensive long-term plan. That is a 75-year plan that's synced up exactly with the water transfers. But 10 years is the right time frame, because if you don't get the next 10 years right, you won't have to worry about 75, because the sea is shrinking today. And if you don't build projects and cover up that receding shoreline, then everybody here is basically subject to the prevailing winds. And that's true in the Coachella Valley as well. So I think that this insistence that there be a long-term plan and that it ought to, and that if there isn't one, there shouldn't be a 10-year plan, allows the perfect to stand in the way of the good. And what we need right now is a short-term plan that recognizes that 54,000 acres are going to be exposed in the next 10 years.
Thank you, Assemblyman Garcia. I'm just going to offer some personal observations based on my experience working on the New River project. I was at a panel with Mr. Kelly in Sacramento a few weeks ago. I hate to admit how long I've been working on that project. It doesn't look very good on my resume. That aside, I want to bring to your attention that we have a water quality treaty that the U.S. government adopted with Mexico for the New River. And it prescribes the water quality standards that the river needs to meet near the border on the Mexican side. That treaty was adopted in the mid-'80s. And ever since it was adopted, Mexico has never been able to comply with it. My sense is that those who are very enthusiastic, and again, I'm also not opposed to it, about importing water from the Gulf of Baja California, should look at our track record with the water treaties with Mexico, particularly the water quality treaty. My sense is that that scenario will require a treaty with Mexico. Notwithstanding the current administration, federal administration, I think it's going to require a lot of money. And at this point, I'm of the opinion that would be a distraction. I wish well to those who want to pursue it. But we're in an emergency mode here, not just from a water quality perspective. Obviously, the health concerns of the exposed playa are driving most of the engineering projects for the Salton Sea Management Program. That treaty would have to have significant strings attached when it comes down to the operation and maintenance of that infrastructure. You ought to look at the operation and maintenance of what's going on in Mexicali and in Tijuana as reference. I wish well to those people. I think I concur with Mr. Kelly. We should focus, that's what I understood. I don't mean to put words in his mouth. We should focus on the 10-year plan, and if people want to pursue the bigger venture, that's fine. The bigger the project, the more money it's going to cost, and the bigger the job that we're going to have to do to operate and maintain it. So I just wanted to offer that for your consideration. It is feasible. I'm not sure about the practicability of it.
And actually, you started to touch on it, Jose Angel. First of all, you saved the 6 pages for when the third Garcia shows up, right? So we'll get that in the future.
Shouldn't be
Con
long.
Garcias.
Shouldn't be long.
Hopefully. I made myself a note earlier. I'm new to the Salton Sea and the discussion of the Salton Sea. Assemblyman Garcia has, for the last 3 years, been a voice in the Capitol trying to educate us on that. But I think not till you come here does it start to sink in and you start to process some of what he's been telling us for the last 3 years. But it hit me, and you started to talk about it, of what is the relationship and what is the work and the collaboration we're doing with the Mexican government as they're trying to manage this problem. or do we just have to, because of the crisis we're in, we just have to move forward with or without them? I mean, where are we at on that piece?
Let me first and foremost say that I did not imply that Mexico obviously doesn't want the same things that we want. They want a clean environment or cleaner than we want it, if not. We have the state-to-state an outstanding working relationship with them. We are members of a binational technical committee that was established by the federal governments of Mexico and the U.S. We're an active member of that committee. The IID is also an active member of that committee. But the committee's model for addressing the water quality problems of the New River in Mexicali is based on cooperation, binational cooperation. It's also contingent on federal funds, binational funds for that matter, being available to address the problem at the source. Those of us who have been in this business for quite some time believe that that's the most affordable way to do it when you address the problem at the source. So Mexico, to its own credit, both governments have spent close to $100 million already on improving New River water quality. And I should convey very respectfully for your consideration that the New River water quality problems today are significantly different than the New River water quality problems that we were dealing even 10 years ago. The water quality has improved significantly. The main concern that we, the regional board, have at this point is that we're now facing another $80 million problem in Mexicali with a dilapidated sewage infrastructure. The federal funds for addressing binational problems have been cut gradually every year. We compete with other states along the border for some of those federal binational funds. So we just hope that our colleagues at the federal level continue to prioritize Mexicali for improving New River water quality. Again, there have been significant water quality gains. Our working relationship is outstanding. There is a significant level of trust and transparency. We have very frank discussions with them. It comes down to, Madam Chair, to resources. Not lack of will, not lack of cooperation. It's resources, and I would urge our federal government to continue to prioritize and don't declare victory when we still have an $80 million problem down there. In the long term, Madam Chair, you can expect, it's my professional opinion, that flows are going to be reduced even more than they have during the last 10 years, and we already cut them in half. So probably about 30 cubic feet per second, somewhere in that range. So it's going to be less, hopefully not as bad as it could be.
I have two questions, and one is directed to Kaylee Wright, the Natural Resources. The other is regarding the geothermal conversation. Mr. Kaylee Wright, the 10-year plan focuses on habitat type of work that we feel will address both the public health and the needs of the ecosystem. One of the early conversations and critiques has been that we may be overestimating the amount of cost that we are putting forward to build this habitat versus what potentially private partners with us may be able to do this same work for, therefore stretching out the dollars further and being able to encompass far more acreage. Can you kind of speak on that and the possibilities of the private sector participating in the process of helping build this habitat that could cover more acreage and again address the dust problems that exist today and the future ones based on greater exposure?
Yes, I can. So I think that raises a really important point. State government traditionally in these types of projects functions best when it gives funding to non-state partners who then can turn around and deliver these projects for the state on a contracting relationship. This region, we have struggled to have those partners to develop those projects for the state. So we have had to develop a pathway that goes through state contracting with design build to get to that same goal of getting a outside entity to build to do this as efficiently as possible. I still believe that we need a stronger, whether it be NGO or JPA or what have it, capacity locally to help us deliver these projects more nimbly down the road. But right now we're kind of forged into the situation that we're forged into because of circumstances. And I think with this funding, and this is what I was trying to allude to in my comments, I think with the funding available on the table, and we will see a lot of attention focused on building that capacity locally, so the state has multiple partners who have different talents. We can take advantage of those talents.
Thank you. When we talk about the geothermal integration to the overall Salton Sea conversation, we're looking at private sector partners.
Right.
And so I'm going to shift the conversation to the geothermal component. On the tour and a few times after the tour and even here, it's been brought to light that geothermal, and I will share with you that myself and others at the Capitol, including my colleague in the Senate, have been pushing the geothermal conversation significantly to be part of the overall renewable energy portfolio. And yet we still haven't found the right way to integrate it without making it what folks will refer to as a carve-out or a special circumstance approach. But today I've heard a couple things that are concerning from the standpoint that I've never heard before, that geothermal may not be a good thing. And it's been said that there are negatives that are coming from the geothermal aspect, and I'd hate to walk away from this conversation today and based on what has been said already. So I'd like some additional conversation just for a few minutes as we conclude this segment and move on to the next section, because we believe that there needs to be a diverse portfolio in our renewable energy goals in California. We believe that we need baseload energy to be able to balance the energy needs of the state. We believe that there is an abundance of it here at the Salton Sea area that can help us not only cover up some of these exposed areas because they happen to be some of the hottest places on Earth. We also believe that there's a great opportunity to intersect our climate change goals in California, integrate this baseload energy, train people, and create sustainable jobs, far more sustainable than those that were mentioned in the solar area. Right? We also know that building these geothermals will increase property values and generate additional revenues for the counties and potentially be reintroduced to Salton Sea efforts. But we're talking about geothermal a few times today that as if it was a bad thing. Mr. Cowley, and I'll even say Mr. Hernandez, can you just briefly touch on some of the things that have been mentioned today as if geothermal brings something negative to the table from an environmental perspective? I've heard this 2 or 3 times throughout the day, and I'd like to get some clarification on that.
Go ahead, Joe. From the water perspective, too.
There's 2 levels of regulation for the geothermal facilities, Assemblyman Garcia. One is the federal level, the other one is the state level. The State Department of Oil and Gas regulates a lot of the operations, certainly the extraction of the resource, the installation of the wells, and so forth. We regulate potential discharges of waste. And we have permits for all of them. They're all regulated facilities from my board. I cannot recall a recent incident of noncompliance with our permit. I can't speak for the Department of Oil and Gas. We have had some brine spills which have been contained on site by the facilities. But other than that, I cannot speak to the air emissions. But as far as water quality is concerned, we regulate them. Typically, we do not let those facilities percolate whatever discharge into their ponds, their double-line ponds, their ponds that we call designated impoundments. And to the best of my recollection, they're pretty much in compliance, consistent compliance with our permit.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
I certainly am not an expert in this, But I see the result of the San Andreas Fault in the area that extends all the way to Cerro Prieto in Mexicali and what it has done to that area. And it's not too far from us. So I'm sure that this is something that needs further investigation by you and your committees, because I also have heard from people that have worked out there of situations where it's not, the safest place to work. It's not. There is hazardous waste that they produce, and where is it going? What type of waste is it going? The same thing. The question that I had about pulling it out of there and putting it over there in your backyard. Let's take it out of Perry Valley, put it in Coachella, and then later, 20 or 30 years down the line, you'll find out, hey, this stuff is bad. It's causing cancer to my great-grandkids. So it's a very good question, but I'm certainly not the expert. The other thing is that when agreements are made for the development of geothermal facilities, there needs to be a better local benefit. I mean, Imperial County tried to have a public benefit on the solar that was developed, and a lot of these places even were exempt from property taxes under the Williamson Act. Mm-hmm. So when you say that it's going to create property taxes, well, I'm not too sure about that either. So, and then the mineral extraction, there's agreements in the contracts that the Imperial Irrigation District has entered into with them because it's in our jurisdiction, maybe the county, but certainly a most recent one that's being developed really had no teeth with relation to the environment and the mitigation. So what I'm saying as a community member is that perhaps some may be good. Yes, it's good base load. Yes, we can share some of our abundance of geothermal and solar with Los Angeles or whoever else wants renewables, but not at the expense of our community.
I agree on that closing comment, and I just want to say that it certainly is good and reassuring to hear from the expert from the Regional Water Quality Control Board that there isn't anything to date that he's aware of here locally that has affected any type of or impacted any existing regulation.
It would be really bad if people left here thinking that geothermal was toxic.
Yeah.
So the only place I've ever heard that is I think from you, John. What I do know, and I'm not an expert either, is that geothermal energy is virtually non-emissive, and 56% of our energy portfolio today in this state is natural gas, which is. And the Salton Sea, known geothermal resource area, happens to contain the largest untapped resource in this hemisphere. So it would be foolish for the state of California not to tap into it.
Thank you for your comment on that one. I think the goal of having this conversation is to get a well-rounded perspective on this baseload energy geothermal possibility out here. And I know that one of the reasons also why it has not been able to expand further is because competitively, right, it doesn't receive the property tax exemptions, and therefore the cost of it is certainly far greater than being able to put some of the intermittent energy resources online. But I just wanted to make sure that we don't leave with the perception that, that the geothermal goals and objectives of this region and the efforts taking place at the state level are not in the best interests of this region for economic development purposes, for us meeting California's energy goals, as well as being able to address some of the Salton Sea efforts. And so if there's challenges, and there's been challenges, and if the experts are telling us that there's challenges, so then let's take a look at that and let's have that assessed so that we're not, pushing on something that has adverse effects. But I believe that the geothermal certainly presents a tremendous opportunity for this region, for the Salton Sea, for economic development opportunities as well. I know you have a comment.
Just
Sam,
real
can-
quick, just so we don't compare apples and oranges, one of the advantages of having worked so long on the New River is that you get to visit parts in Mexico where you learn things, and I can tell you with a high degree of confidence that the operations, geothermal operations at Cerro Prieto are significantly different than our operations here. That's a Mexican-owned industry. They don't have lime ponds. Some of those ponds might have leak brines. So again, I just want to make sure that the members in the audience, and respectfully you, Assemblyman Garcia and Madam Chair, understand that we're basically comparing apples and oranges. I'm not defending necessarily what Mexico is doing or trying to give them a bad eye, as much as to tell you that the operations are significantly different. And the information, our regulatory information is available online. The compliance history for this facility is available online. If you know of any problem with them, bring it to our attention. If it doesn't fall within our jurisdiction, we'll route it to the appropriate bureaucracy. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank all of those who are on the panel, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Bright, Mr. Angel, and Mr. Hernandez, for the fruitful discussion. I want to remind those in the public that we will have a public comment period where folks will be able to address questions or comments, or for that matter, even concerns about what they've heard or something relevant to the discussion today. Ms. Garcia, any comments? No. Thank you again. We'll ask our next panelist, Mr. Richard Corey with the Air Resources Board, Mr. Luis Olmedo, Comité Cívico del Valle, Dr. Paul English from the California Department of Public Health, and Mr. Matt Desert to please join us up on the stage.
Thank you. Pardon me. Oh, no problem.
Yeah. Thank you for coming. You're welcome. You can keep that if you want. It's like a souvenir. Yeah. Or you can recycle it then on the way out. Either way. Either that or I'm taking it back on the plane, which I'm not going to do. There you go.
We got the comfortable seat. Yesterday?
No, today.
Oh, yeah, oh yeah.
What? Heard it?
Yeah, the whole thing, yeah.
He's here like getting pissed.
We're going to get started with the second panel. This panel will focus on the implementation of Assembly Bill 617, which focuses on air quality efforts by the state of California. If those of you who will remain in the room can please lower your conversations, or please take your conversation outside, we would greatly appreciate it as we get started with this next panel. We have Mr. Richard Corey, followed by Mr. Olmedo, Dr. Paul English, and wrapping up this segment will be Mr. Matt Desert. So Mr. Corey, the microphone is yours.
All right, thank you, Chair Garcia. What I'm going to cover, and I'm going to be relatively brief in my remarks, what I'm going to cover are really the significance of 617. So to provide some context, I think we have the author in Cristina Garcia here, really significant piece of legislation with respect to air quality. In fact, I've characterized it as the most significant piece of air quality legislation in the last several decades. So for someone that has worked in air quality for over 30 years, this program, or what's called for under the legislation, is impactful. Well executed, it'll be very impactful. It includes enhanced penalties, requirements for upgrading technology at large facilities, monitoring, air quality monitoring at burdened communities, as well as at its core, requirements for plans to reduce emissions in those impacted communities. And really, at its core, it's about public health and protecting public health in the most disadvantaged areas of the state. And the legislature appropriated funding to go along with it, about $280 million this last legislative session, both from a staff resources standpoint and also from the perspective of incentives and moving cleaner technologies forward. But I think for context, a little background would be helpful, and I'll be brief on this. And that is, if you look at the historical air quality programs in California that really patterned after requirements in the Federal Clean Air Act, they were established around regional air quality, reaching regional ambient air quality standards. The air quality monitoring networks was structured around that purpose as well. And what ensued from that were cleaner vehicles. The cars today, for example, are 99% cleaner, 99%, than they were in the 70s. And the number of vehicles, though, that we have, back in the early 70s, we had about 16 million, or 8 million actually. We have about 26 million now. We had about 16 million people. We have about 40 million now. Back then, in the early 70s in the South Coast area of the state, we exceeded our stage 1 ozone alert. This is a multiple over a health-based ozone standard, about 200 times a year, 200 times. We haven't had an exceedance of a stage 1 alert for about 15 years. That's not to say we've reached all that's necessary from a health-based air quality standpoint. We still have significant regional air quality problems. But the whole program was structured around regional air quality. The essence of 617 is about community-focused reductions. And if you look around the state, there are clearly areas, there's no doubt about this, there are clearly areas that weren't seeing as dramatic benefits as we were on a regional basis. Areas near ports, rail yards, freight distribution centers, there were clearly reductions by virtue of cleaner diesel and phasing out, requiring diesel particulate filters. But the risks, they're unacceptable. They're too high. And to me, what this legislation does is very loud and clear demand a process and action to reduce those emissions. And if I reflect a little bit on the regional program in terms of there were elements in it that led to the progress that's been made. One was clear direction, legislative direction, leadership, the key role that partnerships play in effective implementation, ongoing monitoring, how are you doing, and ability to identify transparent results so people can see what's happening and are you achieving your outcomes. Results, ultimately, it's about results. Results matter. And California has attracted a lot of followers nationally, followers internationally, because of results from the regional program. But I believe many of those elements that I just called out, clearly legislative leadership embodied in the two representatives on this panel and embodied in AB 617, there's an absolute commitment for action on a community-focused level. The key role of partnerships, we know we can't be effective without actually having stronger relationships with the communities and really having an open dialogue. To be effective, We need to do that. We don't have all the answers. We do not. We actually are seeking them in the process that we're going through. We're posing questions in the public process that we're going through, and are actively looking at how to even more effectively engage with communities. So if I think about implementation, how are we moving forward? First thing that I did when this bill was established was put an internal team together that reports directly to me. I really tapped the strongest people in my organization, and I created Office of Community Air Protection in the Air Resources Board that reports to me, the executive officer. And in fact, the members of the team, the leadership of that team, are represented here today, and were here yesterday as well. Also knew that public process was going to be key. We've already started a series of workshops, and are looking for more creative and broader ways to engage, because the point that I made earlier is we have a number of questions. We need the input. We need the counsel. We need the advice to ultimately have programs that are effective. And the communities know. The communities know the issues. They have specific experience. We're seeking that out and need it. And if I think about the experience over the last 2 days and a year ago when I was here, and Come Civico de Valle, and the work that has been taking place with Ivan, not only to me is the value, the data that's provided, 40 monitors, there are other elements that ring true to me and I think are something we can learn from. One is the way you've engaged the community. The community involvement in terms of selecting the number of the monitoring stations, the community engagement in terms of the oversight team, community engagement in terms of how to have a transparent system to get data out to people they can see and understand, the engagement of students. I mean, I'm very impressed with the role that students have played both in the implementation of the program and seeking their advice, counsel in terms of how, and training. You think about who are the next leaders, who are the scientists, who are the future legislators. It's effective and smart planning to integrate students in a program like this. I was very, very impressed with the way you all did it. So how are we moving forward in terms of what's next? We have clear legislative direction. Very high expectations, and there should be. We have an incredible opportunity to make significant improvements. When I say that, ultimately the test for me on this program is real reductions, reduced exposures in the most impacted communities. That's ultimately the test. And we're going to be held accountable to it. I'll be held accountable to it, as well as my team, and we should be. But I know to get there and deliver results, it's going to take strong partnerships. And in moving forward, and this is just a fact, it's a fact from someone that's worked on programs over the years, we won't get it all right year 1 or 2. It won't be perfect. We need to have a program that can learn, that has a feedback loop where we get stronger, we get more effective, and we are straight up in admitting that, and we're straight up in continuing the dialogue to continue to develop a program that gets stronger and stronger, and not only will serve California and its impacted communities, but will serve as a model for the United States and the world. I really believe that's where this is going to go. So thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I'd like to once again congratulate the joint authors of this bill, Chairman Cristina Garcia and Eduardo Garcia. This is an extraordinary bill. This is an extraordinary bill that has created an opportunity for a dialogue that had never thought would be possible. And this really sets and paves the road for continued and future legislation that goes down the same path. And why it's so extraordinary for Comité Cívico is because when we've launched our work in partnership with the health tracking program and Dr. Paul English out of the State Department of Public Health, we saw an opportunity to take this step towards developing an air monitoring network, and the National Institutes of Health had a program, Research to Action, that had a $2 million, we were able to apply for a $2 million, which gave us the resources to establish a 40 air monitor network. When we first began this process, we didn't have a roadmap on how we would establish these 40 air monitor network. So we were able to, again, work with our principal investigator, Dr. Paul English, which you'll hear more on the specifics and technicalities of our work. But he was also able to bring other experts on community monitoring. So I really feel we've come a long way to be able to develop, both through scientific methods and regulatory methods, establish a 40 air monitoring network that it lives here in the Imperial Valley and extends throughout the Salton Sea. And now we're also establishing these monitors in the Coachella Valley with some of our partners that are here from La Unión hasta La Fuerza. And some of the important things that I want to highlight, because I don't want to repeat some of the stuff that Dr. English will speak about, but this was really a bottom-up approach. We were able to bring in a community advisory committee. Many of those members are here today. It was because of their efforts and their work that we were able to open the doors to many homes, many institutions in this region. John Hernandez at the time, who spoke earlier, was serving as also one of the boards of the IID, and he was able to help us open the doors there to establish air monitors in all IIDs, air monitors, so we can co-locate with theirs. The Air Resources Board and others also served as part of the Technical Advisory Committee, as well as the local air district, the South Coast, and numerous academics that were also part of the Technical Advisory Committee. So this was an enormous effort that was well-informed through science, through research, and good regulatory methods. And we continue to reinforce that message, because moving forward, 617 still has a lot of defining to do of what the implementation is going to look like. And luckily enough, we've been able to have many conversations with the California Air Resources Board, participate in all their public meetings, being able to have many conversations and help contribute to what that vision is going to look like. One of the things I like to highlight is that there's still not enough money to do community monitoring. Right now, the Air Resources Board, as far as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, Richard, but there's a $5 million for technical support. What does that mean? Because today, the monitoring network that we operate here is operated by Comité Cívico del Valle, and that was part of a $2 million grant. So $5 million, although it may sound like a lot of money, it really isn't enough. Can we take it much further than we did? Absolutely, because we spent 4 years developing a model on how to establish these networks. Right? Now the cost is going to be much less, but it's still to cover a state and so many needs, and especially in areas who may not have any monitoring. There are areas that have no monitors, and there are areas that have very limited monitors. So this is an affordable way to bring more granularity, more data to these areas, especially where communities feel that their experience may not be captured by ambient air monitors that may be looking at more of an average and not necessarily a localized region. It is important that we look at what's happened here in Imperial and export that model. We want to get this knowledge and this capacity to other communities in partnership with the Air Resources Board, with local air districts, local community organizations. We feel that we can replicate this model and put this knowledge in the hands of other communities. It's going to be important moving forward that there is a method and a model to bring greater transparency. One of my biggest concerns are that there are two conversations happening in this state. One is data points. We have the private sector who wants data points to create apps, to bring more information to the public. But will government respond to that data? And that concerns me, because I feel in my conversations with both local and state and federal air regulators, they respond to good science and good regulatory methods. And that's what we design here. We want to make sure that we are a legitimate, that we have good data, and that we're still not going around in circles as we have and trying to demonstrate through visuals and emotions, but not hard science, because that's what government responds to, as well as advocacy efforts and the fact that there is knowledge already in our communities of where these incidents and increased episodes of air pollution are happening. Other things that I see that are important here is the government and community partnerships. Those are going to be important moving forward, and I feel that there are really opportunities, whether it's through the process that ARB has been engaging proactively in, or also there may be a need for additional legislation where there is actually more authority given to the Air Resources Board to be able to prescribe of how this community engagement is going to happen. And I think that's going to be a very important discussion to follow, and also I think a good opportunity to see whether there's legislation that may be necessary to reinforce the state's authority, especially in districts that may be more resistant. Obviously, this is not the case in Imperial, but I do hear from other partners across the state that their districts that want nothing to do with community monitoring. It is important to have this data especially for those areas that have no data. We've been able to use this information for several of our programs. One is when our asthma program, for example, we're able to give this information to the families that are receiving asthma education as a way to control their asthma. We're also able to give them this tool through what we call Ivan Air. And Ivan Air is a platform where we're able to communicate the data, and the public can get it. And any of you who have a phone or can just log on to ivanair.org. Other things is that we're able to get this information, not only locate monitors in schools, but also schools can now keep a better lookout for air quality emissions, whether it's higher pollution or lower pollution. We wouldn't have kids outdoors when it's a rainy day schedule. This information is now becoming very valuable because sometimes air pollution is not as visible as air, as coming in contact with raindrops. But now the schools have this information to make sure they protect children. So that those are other different ways besides the science. And other things that I think are going to be very important is that although this community monitoring is really important, we should not forget that there are priorities right now also as well, equal priorities, and those are addressing those issues where communities are already, where the data is already there, and where I'm learning more and more, even speaking to board member Dan Sakori and some of the communities and many other organizations across the state, where there's a lot of concerns that we don't want to deviate from some of those efforts that are already necessary, where there's already enough evidence that there's a need to have a response from government to reduce those air emissions. I think that there's going to be a need for more resources, more money. $5 million is not going to go far enough, and I hope that through your efforts, both Assemblymember Eduardo Garcia and Assemblymember Cristina Garcia, that the monies are going to be really important moving forward into the next legislative session, and hopefully there's a way to have better calculations of what that need is going to be. And so other than that, I think I'm really looking forward to how Air Resources Board moves forward with this as part of their community engagement process.
Thank you. Can I have my slides up, please? Thank you, Madam Chair, for inviting me to this. I'm an environmental epidemiologist, and I'm principal investigator of the Imperial County Air Monitoring Study. And first, I just wanted to thank the Imperial Irrigation District and CARB for letting us co-locate our experimental monitors at some of their sites. I just wanted to talk maybe a little bit first about the cost that air pollution is having here in the Imperial Valley. I've been working in the Valley on different environmental issues for the last 15 to 20 years. And I think one thing you need to understand is this is a community that's already burdened by what we would call cumulative environmental hazards. So it's not only air quality that is a problem, and these are related to some of these issues we've already talked about, like ag burning, the off-road vehicle use. But there's also water quality issues, there's pesticide exposures, and on top of that, you have, this is one of the counties with the highest levels of childhood poverty rates. We've heard about unemployment issues here. So those types of stressors also contribute to resulting in poor health outcomes here in the Imperial Valley. And so why have we looked at the Imperial Valley? They've had historically the highest asthma hospitalization emergency rates for children in the whole state. And this is something that's consistent that we've seen in statistics over time. And we know that particulate matter that can damage children's lungs. So damage is happening right now to children's lungs from exposure to particulate matter. There's also evidence that exposure to particulate matter can affect children's brains. It can cause neuroinflammation. So this could be affecting cognitive test scores in schools and affecting school performance. These are all large costs that are usually not itemized and quantified, and these costs to this society here needs to be put up as a real cost to the future of these children. I wanted to show you a few slides of the project to give you a little bit better idea. This was a project that we've done, started over 4 years ago, and it was a collaboration from my group, the Environmental Health Tracking Program, with Comité and the University of Washington. So the goals of this project was to deploy 40 PM monitors, to produce useful, high-quality data, implement community actions, and also be looking at the beginning for ensuring sustainability. This is new opportunities that we have now with next-generation monitors. I guess I need to be advancing the slides myself here. Let's see. Not working. Down there. Oh, no. Can you just advance them for me, would you mind? Next. So these are new opportunities with next-generation sensors. This is a new way of what we call democratizing data in science, so we can leverage community knowledge and capacity. And we see this community air monitoring as not taking the place of the regulatory monitoring, but it can be used as a complement to the monitoring. We're actually seeing so much more data now. We're capturing more episodes of elevated PM levels just for the fact that we have a denser network of monitors now. Next slide. So we really first started with establishing these community participation structures, designing, deploying the air monitoring network. We're right now in the analyzing, interpreting the data, and we spent a lot of time on thinking about how to display and disseminate the air monitoring results, and these results will help implement community action strategies. So let me talk a little, next slide, let me talk a little bit about the community engagement part next. So we had community participants. They were members of the community that hosted monitors. They helped us collect data, and they made recommendations on where we would site the monitors. They also helped us identify community actions. We had a community steering committee that guided the project activities throughout. And then Comité Civico was our partner and co-investigator that helped initiate, design, and implement the project activities. They now are maintaining, they've been trained to maintain, to troubleshoot the hardware and software, to maintain a website for reporting. Next slide. So deciding on where to place the air monitors, our goal was placing monitors to meet the community's stated priorities. And I hope this is something that we can continue to see through the implementation of 617. The community wants high-quality data that can identify trends and hotspots. We went through a community process where they selected the priority communities throughout the county. You know, as Luisa said before, this could be, 40 communities identified here. It's not, or it could be seen as one community. So they identified and mapped and ranked candidate monitoring sites. So we had an app on their mobile devices where they were able to go by and record different characteristics of potential monitoring sites and take pictures and video with their mobile devices. Next slide. And so the best practices that we think that the lessons that we learned from this is that there were funded equitable community partnerships. In other words, the community got a large portion of the funds that we got from the federal government, and this was really meaningful community participation. Next slide. So let me talk a little bit about the network deployment and analysis next. So what we call the community air monitors is we have a customized low-cost optical particle counter. This was housed in a box basically that protected the sensor from the extreme temperatures here. It had a fan, has wireless networking, and then this information is now being transmitted in real time up to the Amazon cloud, which the community can access this data, and then it's the data is then transformed into an air quality index that in real time you can see the levels of particulate matter. This is a picture of deployment and maintenance, which is a big issue about continuing to keep the network going. Next slide. Evaluating data quality. I mentioned that we had co-location at federal reference monitors with CARB and Imperial Irrigation District. We formed a technical advisory group of air quality stakeholders that meet regularly, that include the federal and state representatives. Next. And we had a careful and transparent selection of monitors and evaluation of data quality. And we were doing this to aim to have the community have access to and ownership of the data, and I think that's another key point. So what's some of the results? Next slide. Next. Here's a screenshot of the data that's available on our community web platform. You can view a map of the monitors that you've been seeing, getting air quality alerts. Next slide. So we've seen this in the previous of the only a small number of regulatory monitors over the size of this county. This is basically the size of Connecticut here in Imperial Valley. And now we have these 40 monitors giving much more detailed data. Next slide. This was the community response, where we've had local proclamations, and Luis can tell you more about the recognition this project has received. And next slide. These are some of the impacts. I don't have time to go through them, but these have informed school flag programs, a flag program at a senior center, where there's been input into an Imperial EJ task force, the Cal EPA EJ advisory committee. We have a high school student program going on right now. We've had increased intention and responsiveness from the local air district, CARB, the US EPA. And we've had government interest, obviously, in using the data in the model. And we really feel that this network we've developed now can actually be used to use as an evaluation tool to evaluate its mitigation properly happening in around the Salton Sea area, since now we have quite a few monitors around the Salton Sea, but also in the communities where people are breathing air. So just to kind of wrap up on some of the best practices, next slide. We provided data to the community in ways that are accessible, understandable, useful, and actionable. Next slide. And the lessons learned next are the use of these low-cost sensors provide useful, actionable information. It benefits all partners, and we had an initial plan for sustainability and community ownership. Next slide. And early community engagement is critical because it builds trust. It provides local knowledge and relationships, the ability for the local members to go and engage monitor hosts or businesses is much more easier than if we had the local air districts trying to get these agreements for sites. And we think that the community should guide the decision-making of the process. So those are my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eddie. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Mr. Olmedo, for your activities and outreach and your confirmed success over the years, and none more confirmed than the passage of 617. My name is Matt Desert. I'm the new Air Pollution Control Officer in Imperial County. I'm new in that position as of the middle of January. I had 10 years previous experience in that department, working with the Air Pollution Control Officer Brad Porras, who is serving the Mojave Air District at this time, but who still lives in the community and who's in the audience today, and Mr. Reyes Romero. And I've got to compliment them on the job they've done, have done, and continue to do in the education and experience they gave me while working with them. Some of the successes that we have in our community at the Air District are mostly not on my watch. These things were set up in motion and going forward before I arrived. With that being said, my background as an irrigation district director at the IID, it provided me some additional insight into the community and to the resource management of both energy and water in our surrounding area. but primarily my experience at the IID was to participate at the Board of Supervisors with the County Board of Supervisors and the IID directors in forming a strong partnership together and moving activities forward in regards to the water resource in our backyard at the state level and the federal level. And of course, with resources and management of them, there are always air impacts. And those air impacts and air activities are directly correlated with water if you take a hard look at them. At Imperial County, we are currently under a new Chief Executive Officer. And it's a great choice that the Board of Supervisors have made. You see, she is the past or still current Public Health Director. So that's at the forefront of your Board of Supervisors' minds, public health, and viewing how they are represented into the community. Robin Hodgkins is the lady I speak of today, and she has been an instrumental tool to put a strong partnership together with Comité Civico, with IDA Fulton, with the Air Pollution Control District, and with the Public Health Department. Here again, this is some of the successes that were already put together before I arrived at the position I am today. But it's a partnership, and I alluded to a partnership earlier between the IID and the county in having success at the Salton Sea. So much success that there should be a ceremonial activity Tuesday on some accomplishments for the 10-year plan at the Metropolitan Water District in those regards. Along with that teamwork at the Public Health Department, in the audience, I'd like to recognize two folks that are here today. It's Christine Olson and Denise Andrade. Together, Christine, Denise, and Robin, your Air Pollution Control District, with myself and Reyes Romero, are working together as a strong team to engage with the Environmental Justice Group, Comité Civico, led by Luis Ometo, and the public health outreach at the El Centro Hospital with IDA Fulton on a strong asthma campaign. I looked at that grouping and was very relieved when I first arrived at the Air District to see the shoulder-to-shoulder activity of that group. It's a smart group that touches a lot of different bases in the Imperial Valley. It'll be a smart group to assist in the design and direction as we work forward to implement 617 as best we can, and of course, as best we are funded. Funding is an accountable issue. It's important as we design this air monitoring network or inherit existing air monitoring networks that have been successful, that we continue to redefine them and make them as smart as possible and cost-effective as possible. For you see, when they're smart and cost-effective, they will be defensible to financial audits or scrutiny from taxpayers, ratepayers, or from our own state of California. And in the long run, to keep this project going forward, that is what we're after. Without a doubt, this is a different way to do air pollution regulation. It's a change, a sea change. Changes aren't absorbed or accepted easily often, but they can happen. As an example today of the success of Comité Civico and the environmental justice groups here in the Imperial Valley. As we better look at our air district and identify those sensitive communities or receptors, it comes to mind in the Imperial Valley an area called colonias. We heard a presentation from Esmeralda at the county today, Esmeralda Colio, about an inventory of these unincorporated areas of living called colonias that have been scrutinized over the years for good reason, for being somewhat substandard. Yet they're productive households and homes there. There's people that are proud to live there and have said they've come from there, and there's tremendous success stories. those areas are for sure a place that we could look at to see how these monitors are better reflective than our conventional monitors. And then a sister project to that in the Coachella Valley would be taking a look at these substandard trailer parks, or as they're often called, Polanco parks. I first learned about these Polanco parks while serving on the IID board, and I learned about them from Riverside County Supervisor Manny Perez, Eddie Garcia, who was working with him at the time, IID General Manager Kevin Kelly, and Senior IID Board Spokesman Jim Hanks. So these areas are known in our communities, and they're known not only by those that perhaps are of Hispanic descent, but they're known by all of us in the community, especially those born and raised in the community with deep roots in the community that are proud to call this place home and intend to stay here. It's only natural to hear frustration in people's voices as they come to podiums or they reach out to agencies, because at agencies there's a powerful presence by the board, a power, water, utility, a board of supervisors, a state board. And you can't really fully understand that until you've served on a board or you've been on the other side on that podium trying to get attention from that board. And nobody has been more frustrated over the years in a collective area than perhaps the environmental justice movements that have success today. So my parting words or advice before any questions I may stumble and try to answer is this movement, this activity has arrived. Your success is solid through recognized funding from the state at this time. Your success is solid from recognized Air Resources Board activity, which I would highly recommend everyone watch from the last Air Resources Board when 617 was discussed for over 3 hours in a very positive and successful manner. So with that success, let's try to mend any bridges that need to be mended out there and move this activity forward as fast as possible and as smart and cost effective as possible. Thank you.
I want to thank you all for your comments, and I do have some questions, but before I have some questions, some comments specifically about AB 617 as we work through it, and just as I hear your interpretation versus my interpretation and some of the differences that I see there. But I think that that's normal, and I think part of the process is bringing the different perspectives and then finding that common ground, because I'm not the owner of this. We all are the owners together of AB 617. But I want to start off with this discussion of funding, because it's an important discussion, and both Mr. Garcia and myself referenced the fact that we're both going to go back to our colleagues next year and ask for more money, because we know that what we got either for the Salton Sea or for 617 it's just the first down payment, and we know that more is needed. And that challenge that we're going to be told, well, we already gave you all this money out there. And I think we're committed to that work. We're committed to the work and to help each other in that process as we try to make sure our communities get their fair share of justice. But I think I would say a couple of things. When Luis Olmedo, you spoke about the $5 million and what that was for. That $5 million, while not a lot, is not necessarily meant for buying monitoring equipment or so forth. It's meant to ensure that community groups like yourself and other ones can be part of creating these plans, and includes the part of the professional side of it all, or staff time or whatever else. I think it's recognizing that we can't just say, come do this work, and we're not going to give you any resources to supplement your budgets on that. I would say that on the funding, as far as the implementation of AB 617 and the monitoring equipment and so forth, yeah, there will be funds coming from whether it's GGRF or other funds that we're going to be looking at through at the state level and through budget. But I think there's also an expectation that there will be some additional funds that the district starts to look at through either permit fees or fines or other areas out there. and helping to supplement what the state gives you. I think it would be naive to think that the state would give you all the money you need along the way. As much as we would love that to be the case, I've never seen it happen. And so there is an expectation that local air districts will start to think about how they could help pay for this in other ways also. I think there is a real commitment. The first $280 million was appropriated towards the implementation of AB 617. And when that money was first appropriated, I said, well, are you going to give me more money? Because I really don't know yet what I need for AB 617, to your guys' comment, and part of what we're trying to figure out through this process that we're learning. And the answer was, we don't know what that is, but it was a sizable amount to show the commitment from the administration and from leadership that we do take this implementation seriously. I think the work we're going to have and the challenge we're going to have is to make sure that once this governor leaves and we have a new governor, the new governor continues with that same level of commitment that we see from our current governor with funding and coming from GGRF or other places for that matter. I think timelines are really important, and this starts to get to my question for all of you is, what I see here is a model of working with the community, telling the community, you do have the capacity, let me help get you the skills that you need in the meantime to fill that in. Let me help create job opportunities for you. Let me help create training opportunities for you. And let's do this together so that it's done in a scientific, respective manner, but in a way where they're part of it and they trust it also. And I think that's what, if I had to take one lesson and what I'm eager to learn more about is that. And so I guess timeline is how long, and before you answer this question, I have a little bit more to this. How long did it take you to get to this point? And I get that you were at a point where you were starting fresh and there was no model. And if you had to take what you've learned and you had to go share it with the community, how long do you think, say, my community would need to get to this point where you're at today? And I ask this question because AB 617 has some real deadlines. It has the first deadline of October 2018, where the ARB needs to have the statewide strategy and have identified communities that we're going to be working in, and what a community is still being discussed. They also have to be thinking of the strategy for monitoring, and so we have two things that are happening with this October 2018 deadline. And then we have to have local air districts then create their plans by October 2019. And so we have some real timelines, and as we're learning, I also want to be how realistic these timelines are now than maybe based on your experience. Because if I had to guess where we needed to be by 2019 is kind of where you're at now. And maybe a little bit further, to ensure that we're not just monitoring, but we're doing the actual work that needs to be done to get some solutions.
So I'll share this question response with all of you here, but certainly our principal investigators here to help answer anything on the science side. We have the capacity today to launch this type of monitoring immediately into communities. I attended the Air Resources Board hearing on 617, what was it, last week? About a week ago? Was it last week? So many things happening on 617. And one of the things that one of the board members had said, I believe it was Dr. Bombs, if that's correct, he acknowledged and recognized, and other board members as well, says, the technology for PM10 it's fairly good right now. The science is fairly good. The conversion and calibration, it's providing very good data. And what I heard him say is, why not move forward with what we know is ready today? There's still a lot of contaminants out there, toxics and other types of emissions that the technology is improving every day, and air districts like South Coast and Bay Area and others who, as well as the Air Resources Board, that are testing these types of technologies that may take a little longer to build a confidence, and that's why we have regulatory monitors that still need to be there and expand those to the greatest possibility as possible as funding allows. But it's important today that we have the ability to get a community rolling right now with the resources. As I said, yes, we did spend $2 million, but today, we can do it with a fraction of that amount of dollars. I believe, I don't know if I was to throw what it would cost today for us to set up a monitoring from 2 million, I would say that, and Dr. English, you tell me if I'm too far, but this is just the ballpark figure. We can probably do it for $250,000 today. That's the difference of where we're at today and where we were 4 years ago. The technology is also getting much lower cost, and that's why we're focusing on building the network and infrastructure. That's going to be important, because as more monitors become more reliable and more effective, we're going to be able to add more monitors to that network. And so focusing on the network itself and the technology and thinking that we're going to hand out this technology to communities, that's the wrong approach. We need to make sure that this type of network is in the custody of an organization that has the capacity, and there are organizations across this entire state that have the capacity, that have relationships, that are able to get the access into different buildings, whether it's schools, whether it's homes, residential areas, whether it's businesses, and cut the red tape. That's another reason.
And that's my question. I mean, so to train the community members and have them go out there and be the owners of these monitors and this network, what's the time frame that you envision a community needs to do that? I get that you go
to
in there
deploy
and
a
start
monitoring
working.
network right now?
Sorry, repeat that.
To establish an air monitoring network?
Yeah. And
It's
own it, establish and own it in a way where we're going to, they're going to be, like, I talked to you earlier somewhere against the wall, I forgot which shop we were at, and I was asking you about the work of the community, the training that went behind it, what they do on a regular basis, the data and the reliability of the data, and you shared with me everything that went behind that. And so my question is, if I were to show up in the city of Bell Gardens, the city of commerce, where I have this corridor of freight and good movements and trucks out there, and so I could have data, but I already know it's a hotspot, right? But for them to have these monitors and own it in the way that you see the community members owning it here, are we talking about 6 months for them to get to that, to get the training they need? Are we talking about a year? Are we talking about 6 weeks? I mean, if you were going to show up and tell these folks, you could do this, let me help you set it up,
Well, we're an environmental justice organization, and there are many established environmental justice organizations in your district. I would say that there are organizations that have the capacity and ability to do what we do here. And yes. I think it's important to engage them and be able to export this knowledge and put it in their hands.
Yes.
That's where we see the difference.
But how long does that take?
If we had the resources, we can do it now. And we had the support of the community, and we had the support of the Environmental Health Tracking Program, who helped us through the process of facilitation and the science and engagement. We can do it. We can do it tomorrow. I mean, it's just getting the partners and everybody on board to be able to deploy this. Now, as an environmental justice organization, we're very respectful of communities and our partners throughout the state, and even including those in your district. I think that that's going to be very important, not to ignore the established efforts and struggles that are there. But today, if we were to do this, we're ready to go with the PM.
I'm not inviting you to come do the work for them, actually.
Let me see.
And that's not my question. I'm not inviting you to come do the work for them. I want them to do the work for themselves, and I want them to figure out the plan that works for them. I just want to know how much time I have to give them to make that happen.
Yeah, I mean, well, part of it's going to depend on how many monitors you're talking about as for deployment. But one thing I want to say is this process needs to remain scientifically defensible.
Yes.
So there is a time element. I mean, these monitors, they're being tested, for example, down at South Coast at their AQ Spec Labs. These monitors still need to be tested, calibrated out in the field. So this is a process I think CARB is really thinking about, and CARB is really going to need to assist these communities in doing this calibration work, and that takes some time to do that.
That's the timeline I'm asking about.
I think it was maybe several weeks that we did calibration with some of their portable reference monitors, for example. Besides that, the other part of this, and I think a lot of the time, I'm actually worried about the timeline, because I think part of the time, part of the whole resources for this is not really the technical part, but I think it was with the translation, the health education, the outreach that we provided with the community for them. We developed curriculums on these different topics. We did trainings on monitor siting criteria. We're developing a manual for this that I hope that other communities can use, but there needs to be sets of curriculums developed. You need to have staff with the skills to communicate this information to communities that know about community participatory research, that have background and skills in those areas. These are the type of staff I don't hear talked about, but they need to be at these local air districts to work with the communities. And so that takes a process, that takes time, and then we go through a system then of deployment of the monitors, and of course, there has to be arrangements made with the monitor hosts or with the schools, and sometimes agreements need to be signed. So all this does take time, but I just hope that this process doesn't shortchange the piece about engaging with the community and doing the training, capacity building, and education that I just think are really essential.
And with that in mind, I have the same concern, and I don't want the community to be shortchanged. And so, given the work you've done here and the exercises you've gone through here to get to the point you're at, is this 2019 deadline feasible if we're talking about 10 communities across the state?
Yeah, I mean, it depends, again, how many communities are you going to engage? Can you stage it? If you're going to try to deploy this all over the state all at once, I don't think you can do it. So.
Well, no, I mean, not everyone's going to get a community action plan to begin with.
Yeah.
I think that's part of what the ARB is struggling with right now. How many communities do we have within our timeline, within our capacity? Do we have those professionals that you were talking about to work directly with the community members to do the training and then meet deadlines? I mean, that's part of why I'm asking that question as I try to manage expectations, because right now everyone wants a community action plan, and I know that in the first round that's not going to happen. The bill is written in such a way that we're supposed to come back on a cyclical basis to adjust and expand along the way, but it's not going to start off that way.
Yeah.
And I think part of why I'm here and the ARB here is to try to figure out how do we roll this out in a smart way, in a way that's respectful of our community members, and also managing expectations so that we're not setting each other up for failure.
Right. And, I hope I wasn't making some assumptions, Richard, about saying what CARB's thinking about. I don't know if you want to contribute to the conversation.
Only thing I would add, and it's really what was Chair Garcia just touched on it, and it was that the 617 does call out some timeframes for establishing monitoring guidance, which is going to have a lot of specificity, and process matters for developing that guidance. And then calls out the time frame she mentioned for districts to establish monitoring in those most impacted communities in the mid-2019 time frame. And I think the districts and others would be the first to say that time frame's challenging. But, and I think as you noted, process matters. And the process that needs to go through, that will need to go through and are going through, the districts will need to go through to make sure that engagement is there, that is a critical element. I think their point would be it's tight, but it's going to be doable. We believe that. And we also believe, though, that monitoring networks are dynamic. You're not going to be done mid-19. You would have core pollutants. You would likely add pollutants over time as the technology improves. You would likely add monitors. But the lead up to that, both in terms of process, site selection, lease agreements, power to site, all those basic mechanics that need to go into selection of sites clearly are need to play out. And as was noted before, there was resources that the legislature appropriated to get out the gate. And as Chair Garcia noted, there's a recognition to maintain, develop, and evolve these programs will take support over time. And that was, that was really, really good to hear that point.
And just hearing both conversations here, I just want to add that today, Comité Cívico, we have full capacity. All that knowledge has been transferred to us in order to operate the system. We have full control of the data. We understand all the science behind it. We're able to respond to any issues and maintain it. And Rich Corey mentioned a really important thing is these site agreements. They can be really a nightmare, a lot of red tape that could make it very impossible to launch too many communities all at once. I mean, so these are the reasons why I think it's really important to have these community partnerships in place in order to make 617 successful.
How long ago did you start the work that you're doing now, this monitoring? Yeah, here. How many?
4.
4 years ago.
Thank you, Chair, for those questions. And I know Board Member Tekborian has a question as well.
I think just as a, I really appreciate this hearing, and thank you both for convening us all and to the panelists. I just wanted to reinforce something, Chair Garcia, that you just mentioned. And one of the things I think that's really, really important is that we understand that this is going to be a really vibrant, robust, and broadly scoped process, because if we're doing community monitoring and we're doing community planning, we're not exactly sure what order that's all coming in, right? And so I think the stress that the panelists have all mentioned, which is about really strong community participation, it really we need to be grounded in the community, I think, as Luis has said, in a really authentic way that will enable, if it's a stakeholder committee, if it's an advisory committee, it's a decision-making committee, whatever that structure looks like in each of the communities, is the one that takes the process from start to finish, where the community is determining what the issues are and what level of monitoring they need. I mean, I think that everyone has said this isn't a one-size-fits-all. So in some cases, we have a ton of data, and what we need are some gaps to be filled in, and in other places, we don't have any data, and we desperately need a really robust community monitoring system. So that determination seems like it really needs to be made, because we're not going to have endless amounts of money to do this, right? So we want to be as efficient as possible. And I think, as you've said over and over again, this is about true action and emission reductions in our communities. I mean, our community, I come from an environmental justice community. This is about really getting relief for our residents so that folks quit having the kinds of asthma and respiratory diseases and other diseases that they have. I know that's your intention behind the bill. So, I think that ARB staff are really working hard to try to figure out the most efficient and effective way to have authentic community participation and have robust science and have clear plans that can move on a regulatory basis. So I think there's going to be, I don't have the answer either in terms of the number of months, but I do think there's going to be a lot up front that has to be set up so that all of these systems can go into place, whether it's planning or monitoring, action, all those elements that are going to have to go forward from a solid community base. So we're probably going to need more time. Maybe that's a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I was going to ask a question for Mr. Corey, and then of course for our locals, perhaps Mr. Civico will respond. Mr. Corey, we have various ways of communicating to the legislature in terms of the progression, right, on certain mandated policies, regulations that are occurring. My role as a board member representing the legislature certainly is one way of being privy to what's happening there and conveying that back to my colleagues in the legislature. But can you think of any other mechanisms or systems that we are ensuring that, every step of the way as it relates to what you may need from the legislature to assist you, right? It may be this question, and although we're just getting started with the development of AB 617 programs, and we're already chatting about we may need more time, right? And although rightfully so because of the extensiveness of the work, how do you look at, the systems in place to be able to communicate that clearly and loudly, to the legislature, to say, hey, aside from more resources, we're going to need to modify, we're going to need to pivot in a specific place here to be able to extend the time for the purpose of being more thorough, identifying the communities, having the public process with the stakeholders to make sure that we're getting it right, that we're targeting the exact communities that we need to be prioritizing. So just some comments on that. And then the other, as it relates to the lessons learned here locally, and I know that it's been mentioned, there may need to be other legislative efforts in January to expand on the work. Perhaps, the panelist, to your right, Mr. Corey, can say, here's one area that we need to shore up on from a public policy standpoint within the realm of what we're discussing. So I'll give the time to Mr. Corey and then follow the other question with the other panelists.
Yes, thanks, Chairman. In terms of legislative engagement, to me, and progress in terms of 617 and issues, discussions, I think there are a few forms for that. One clearly is this joint committee, which I think serves a really important purpose. I think the other was reflected in AB 197 with the appointments of 2 legislators to our board, 2 exceptional legislators, E. Garcia, Assemblyman, and Senator Laura, which also affords an opportunity for how are we moving forward, board briefings, board discussions, and our ongoing consultation with legislative staff. But there's a very frequent basis in terms of how are the programs moving forward, are there issues, are there concerns. So I think informational hearings, the board reports, legislative staffers, progress reports that we're putting out. In fact, one of the things that will follow the public process that we've been having so far is the recognition of there needs to be multiple touch points along the way in terms of the products, the monitoring guidelines, the state strategy. We'll be putting draft concept papers out, having public discussions on those, getting input, revising to ultimately develop a product. So there's multiple milestones that we're engaging, that people are really being sought out, weighing in along the way. And I think those will present an opportunity too for discussion in terms of from legislative leadership. Are we on track? Are we in line with what was envisioned? And clearly, you all have a direct ear to the ground. And the feedback from you all, if we're off track, if things are going well or they're not, I know that we hear from that side as well, which is really useful. So I think there's a two-way communication, and I'd certainly be the first to say, are there additional venues to even strengthen that? There's a real openness and interest to that as well.
I know, thank you. I know that, from a geographic location, we are quite a distance away from certain parts of the state. And, I think everyone here, including myself, is very appreciative of you and the entire ARB team that's working on these policies. I think if we don't hear it from, folks in the public today, I wanted to express that, but I also wanted to say, if it is said on behalf of some of our constituents here, I think your presence here on an ongoing basis, I think, is very important in the efforts of collaborating, whether it be here or in Ms. Garcia's district or any of these other areas of the state that we're going to be focusing those efforts. I think that's going to be an extremely important component to be part of these community conversations as we're developing these programs and trying to measure our actual results from the implementation side. So my question again will be about the public policy side. It's been mentioned there may be some areas that we already need to be focused on. I'd love to hear them. I'm sure my colleague would as well, right? There isn't a perfect bill that's ever been introduced and signed by the governor. We recognize that, and we want to make sure that what are the areas that ultimately we need to be considering to fill in some gaps to make our efforts a success and meet our objectives.
Yeah, and I believe that's there's a lot of opportunity, and I believe that there's probably going to be a lot of recommendations coming forward, not just here locally, but across the state. I talked to a lot of my environmental justice colleagues. I think there's a lot of interest in making sure that the Air Resources Board is able to implement this policy piece in a way that one is that it is truly a community, a bottom-up approach, that it is interpreted in a way that the community plays a role. Currently, just hearing from many different air districts, some actually, as you heard today, I mean, they're on board, they're ready to go, while others don't see that this is really a community engaged process, or that there will be any sense of partnership with communities In fact, they see this as we're just going to throw one more monitor, regulatory monitor, and then we check the box and we get more resources in our air district. And I think that these are going to be the struggles and challenges, and that's what happens when you have a piece of legislation that there is still not quite as prescriptive. I mean, definitely, as I've heard Richard and others say, this is the best piece of legislation when it comes to community monitoring, or the most significant in terms of air monitoring that has happened in the last 30 years. But again, this is a piece of legislation that just opened the doors to community monitoring that we never thought would actually bring it to a regulatory level this early. So I think that, for one, we definitely, as I heard board member Dan Takorian, and I've heard this from many communities throughout the state, is we want to make sure that this bill isn't seen as a replacement for let's wait and do more research. Right? There are communities who are ready today for plans to make reductions. So I think it's going to be important whether this bill does it today. I think because it is in the implementation phase, it's kind of hard for me to say this is not going to happen. I mean, that's ARB's role in the leadership of the ARB board to keep, and as well as Richard, to keep both the staff and the board itself to be able to get the most out of this bill. I think the most mileage we can get out of this bill. Second is try to get this, roll it out. What I would say is, again, and I've said this numerous times, there are two conversations happening, and one is this a bill that's going to create opportunities for private sector to just collect data, but not give us any significant science, any significant enforcement or even response from government? Or is this a bill that's going to be truly scientific and regulatory compliant and be taken serious by both local, state, districts, and get a response to? And I think those are the policy opportunities that I see here, as well as, and I'll continue to say, the resources. Because currently right now, there are $5 million that have been allocated for technical assistance, right? As you see here in Imperial, we're not at the technical assistance phase. We're already doing community monitoring. And this data over the last 2 years will serve two purposes, because we're not the only model. We've replicated this model with our partners in San Isidro, and they're actually doing other types of monitoring, gas and other types of gas, other types of, what is it? Black carbon, and so on. Well, that is a project that is funded by Office of Environmental Health Hazards. Now, what's their goal? Is to make sure that data quality is good enough to include in the CalEnviro screen. We want that too. And we should have what we have here or better. We should do nothing less. Communities deserve to have what we have here or better, but nothing less. And I believe that those are the policy recommendations that I see, obviously more refined, but there's some areas that I think that where we can tie in policy to make sure that we don't deviate from that effort. Anybody else want to talk policy?
So I will just actually make my closing comments. The $5 million should not just be for the technical assistance to get the monitoring done, but then we have a community action plan. So I don't want you to think that you're cut out of tapping into those funds somehow. I think you should pursue some of those funds for yourself, even if you are at a further along stage. I will say this, so just to be clear, if all we do to answer or talk about future legislation, AB 617, if all we do is monitoring, you have not met the intent and the goal of AB 617. AB 617 requires that you have a community action plan and that you implement, and we have some real results with certain deadlines and measurements along the way. And so there's been a lot of discussion about the monitoring because that's the more concrete example we have right now. But we need to take it to the next step, and a group like this is primed to be that example that AB 617 can succeed and it must succeed for our community members. And so I want to make that really clear. Enforcement, yes, I've heard the diversity from my local districts. Having you down here and the excitement I've been hearing from you for the last few months is exciting, and it gives me hope. But I've also heard from my other districts that are like, you know, how do I check this off? And this goes to the state ARB and the role they have to make sure that you take this seriously. And if you don't take this seriously, the authority they have to impose to make sure you're doing your job and you're following suit along the way, and the community is a part of that. And so we're not going to leave community behind. I think the difference will be of how quickly a community gets there. Your enthusiasm ensures our community moves along sooner and faster towards a long-term solution. These other districts that are delaying are going to get there eventually too, because we're going to have to push them. And I think the consequences are going to be severe along the way. In that this bill isn't perfect. There is new legislation we expect down the pipeline as we're learning on this, but this bill is clear that it's not just about monitoring. And so I just want to make sure that as we're discussing 617, we're able to take what we know, look at monitoring, but move well beyond that along the way. As far as the extensions of deadlines and so forth, I'm a teacher at heart. And I don't necessarily have extensions. I more think about, I don't expect you to do the whole state today. So within these deadlines, what can you do to ensure I have both monitoring, enforcement, and a real plan and some real changes happening within this window? And so for me, it's not an extension of, okay, between now and 2019, I'll do this monitoring. This would have been a failure, and I'm not going to have patience for that. I have patience of how large or how small we start in this process, of how many communities we begin with out there, and how we grow that out, and how we learn from the first ones to make sure the next ones are better. And the last thing, and it's been discussed a lot, it's been my intention all along that this is community driven. I had said it from the beginning, we need to shift the paradigm of telling community members this is your problem and this is your solution. And we need to start listening to them about the problems they have, and then working with experts to help them develop solutions that make sense for them and solutions that they could own and be a part of. And so we're then creating the job opportunities and the technical assistance and the economic development that these communities need, and that ownership to ensure that this ball doesn't get dropped, because this is their backyard and it's in their interest to make sure we get it right. I want to thank everyone that came out today. I want to thank you all for your continued support and investment in 617 and its success. It's selfish. It has our name and it's our legacy, but it's not about our legacy. It's about the health of our community members, and that's really the work that you're doing. Thank you. Public comments.
Many people have left. I'm hoping you're going to give me a little more than 3 minutes. I have comments on both the air bill and the Salton Sea issue. And first I want to say, if you want success in 617, I was on the Community Steering Committee. I've lived in Imperial County for 40 years. I've lived in the Valley for only a couple of weeks because I was sprayed with pesticide and herbicide, and I had to move away from irrigated agriculture in order to save my life. So I feel very strongly about air quality issues and have dealt with them for 40 years and commenting on projects. And I want to say that if you really want to make progress on AB 617, I would ask the legislature to please add additional funding for Paul English, the California Department of Public Health, and the environmental tracking team. It was just awesome the amount of time and effort they spent helping educate us. And with my background in science, it was really important to me to have someone like Paul English that had the technical expertise that made me feel really comfortable about the data and interpreting everything. So some of us needed to know that there was somebody with a technical background. And I've appreciated Astrid's analysis of the data, but you know, I can understand the importance. So the best way to make things happen fast is to be sure the legislature provides adequate funding to the Department of Public Health. And because I can't even imagine the amount of time, energy, and patience that the staff at Environmental Health Tracking spent with us to make sure we understood. And when it was computer things, and some of us don't have the technical skills that some of the younger people do And so it was important for them to make sure that those of us that were older understood how things worked and made sense to us too. So for every community, I'm sure that that's really important. And I wanted to add, let's see, in terms of the Salton Sea, I was very, well, and to Assemblyman Garcia, I have spent years looking at the adverse public health impacts of renewable energy projects, and I've been involved in litigation related to the health impacts on some of those projects. And one of the things that concerned me was Imperial County wrote at one point a 70-page agreement for implementation and monitoring mitigation for the Ocotillo Wind Project. And when sued in court, it is my understanding that the county told the judge that the agreement wasn't worth the paper that it was written on, and that the county had no intention of implementing it. And the project was on BLM land. BLM did not have the technical staff, engineering or others, to do oversight. So projects were approved with basically free rein to the industry approving, to the detriment of the community and public health and the dust. And when it comes to renewable energy, my experience from where I live, and I can see the source of the dust, the particulates, when the wind is blowing, there is nothing that has been very effective in reducing the dust emissions from disturbance where there's been industrial scale wind or industrial scale photovoltaics. And the people downwind, I mean, I live on the west side of the county, and I've seen the source of particulate matter, and when I get into El Centro, I'm seeing what people are suffering from down there. So I think it's really important. And when I look and see the billows of dust and smut and sand coming off the Ocotillo Wells State Vehicular Recreation Area, I know why some of the air quality monitoring stations around the Salton Sea and at the north end have higher PM10 levels. And I would really like the legislature to ask the Department of Recreation to do something to mitigate or control maybe the amount of off-road vehicle activity that's allowed at Ocotillo Wells State Vehicular Recreation Area, because the people in Imperial County downwind are paying the public health price of recreation that's going on state lands in San Diego County by people that don't live here and have to deal with it. And I've gone up to the Salton Sea and seen billows of black smoke coming from one of the geothermal facilities. At the same time, a cloud of blowing dust and sand was coming from Ocotillo Wells State Vehicular Recreation Area. There was no blowing dust and sand coming from the dirt roads along the edge of the road related to irrigated agriculture. So you could see where it was coming from. And at one point, we took photographs and actually called the Department of Toxics because we were so shocked at what we were seeing coming from a geothermal plant. So I will be sending you some information that I've gathered over the years on the negatives.
Thank you. Will you just state your name and if you represent an organization, just for the record, so that we know?
I'm Edie Harmon from Ocotillo. The county knows me too well.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And also when it comes to the Salton Sea, one thing I listened to everything people were saying, and I can't help but think if Washington is talking about finding enough money to build a wall along the international border, I think it's a total waste of money, and the state legislature should be asking for money, and all the departments for money to deal with the Salton Sea and the public health impacts along the international border and the economic issues. That's far more important than building an unnecessary wall.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, if you'll state your name and if you're affiliated with an organization, we would appreciate that. And also, if you want your comments to be heard loud and clear by some of these individuals on the panel, some of them have to take off soon and catch a flight. And so if you would be mindful of the time, and we appreciate that. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you. Good evening, Al. Yes. Brad Porres. I'm the Executive Director of Mojave Desert AQMD. I'm also a board member for the CAPCOA, California Air Pollution Control Officers Association. So I have a couple different hats I'm going to comment on, but first on 617 in that respect. I'm a little concerned with some of the comments that Madam Chair said about some of the air districts just wanting to check the box. because that's not the case. I mean, I represent all 35 air districts in the state of California, and as you know, we were very active in the process for the legislation moving forward. And working with the Air Resources Board, our colleagues, parts of this legislation, the components of that require the air districts to do many things, and it's going to be a challenge. We all recognize that, and we're all willing to step up to the plate to try to make sure that your bill is successful. But you need our cooperative partnership as well as a community on several components here. So I'm a little disheartened when I hear that you are hearing that some air districts are just willing to try to check a box, because that's not why we're established. So you have the pledge from myself, my air district, as well as CAPCOA, to continue working with California Air Resources Board to ensure that the timelines and framework that need to be outlined to make your bill successful do happen. You heard a lot about funding from the community members. It's also funding to the organizations that are charged with carrying out many of the provisions of your bill. One of the things why we need this to be successful in the early stages is because we need to show that if we are successful, you can go after the additional funds from the future legislatures, right? So we need to be successful early on. You heard that in the Salton Sea discussion too. We need to have those successes early on so we can get the interest and the funding behind it. That's going to be critical. I think some of the other components that are missed in the legislation, and Madam Chair started to touch on that, there's other components other than the monitoring that is a requirement out there, and a lot of those are rule revision developments for best available retrofit control technology, and that's going to be very administrative, burdensome on local air districts, because there's a process that has to go through, both public process as well as the administrative part of getting the rules adopted and changed. We've already actively begun that process. Many of the air districts, both small, medium, and large districts, have already begun those assessments. CAPCOA, in partnership with CARB, has already started working on the framework to ensure that the aggressive timelines in the bill, that we can meet those. And I think with Richard's help and the outstanding staff that he's assembled for the division under him to implement this bill, I think we're all going to work as hard as we can to make sure that the bill's successful, because we all want to protect our communities. That's what we do. On that note, I'm thankful that, Eddie, you brought the legislative show down here to Imperial Valley. Like I said, I'm in Mojave now, but I've 22 years. I've been here in Imperial County, lived 14 years right across the street over in Heber, which is a disadvantaged community. It's nice to have that, and I hope this is not the only place we go with this legislative hearing. We have much to do in other parts of the state as well. It's well deserving here in Imperial County, but it's deserving everywhere in the state of California. So I'm hopeful that we don't just stop here and, okay, go our own ways. I hope this momentum continues so we can be successful. And thank you for the time. And again, thank you all for taking time out of your busy days to come down to Imperial County.
I'm a housewife who is interested in documentaries. So the reason I'm here is I want you to be familiar with something called terra preta. It's agrichar. It is something that is natural in the jungles of Amazon. It is because they don't do slash and burn, which we do here in Imperial Valley. They do something called slash and char. And what they do is they reduce the oxygen that goes into the debris that they burn, and they use that to make fertilizer. It is something that is sustainable. It sequesters the carbon in the air. It actually sequesters it and makes it negative char, negative carbon. It is something that I think would be very interesting for Imperial Valley to do, not only Imperial Valley, but California. It's something that's being done in Colorado. It's something that is being done nationwide, and they do something with something called pyrolysis plant in Australia, and they use this plant, and what they do is they put in debris like leaves and branches, and out of that debris they are able to heat it up to 550 degrees without oxygen, and they make something called synglass and agrichar. Agrichar is something that is put into your soil, and it regenerates itself. It is something that is sustainable, regenerative, and it will last for hundreds and thousands of years. It's something that will combat marine dead zones like the Gulf of Mexico caused by agricultural runoff. This Colorado senator pushes statewide for a bill on agrochar adoption. USDA gave $1.5 million for a grant to emulate Terra Preta. It helps our urgent problems by reducing water pollution caused by agrochemicals. It helps with our climate change because it is a negative carbon. It sucks carbon out of the air, and it actually helps the soil. Soil loves carbon, air not so much. And it helps with the soil degradation, which we have with the slash and burn. There's no reason to have slash and burn when you can do slash and char. And this is a product that I was able to get online. It's free. You just go onto this website, chardirect.com, and you can get this product free, and you can try it for yourself. And I think it's something that California could really benefit from because it helps with our water. You use less water. You use less chemicals. As a matter of fact, you don't have to use chemicals, which is a problem that we have.
Can you just state your name so that we don't just think it was the woman who does documentaries who spoke?
Norma Turner.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Assembly members, CARB representatives, my name is Chris Chavez. I'm the Deputy Policy Director for the Coalition for Clean Air. AB 617 represents a great opportunity because for the first time it's requiring air districts to really identify the cumulative impacts of air pollution at the neighborhood level. However, to make sure that 617 is being implemented as effective as possible, it should build upon and add to existing processes that are crucial in reducing air pollution and cleaning our air, such as the state implementation plan, local air quality management plans, the SB 375 Sustainable Community Strategies, and the Air Toxic Hotspots program. Additionally, we feel that AB 617 implementation will require a mixture of sticks and carrots, penalties and incentives, in order to really be truly effective. One area that we particularly feel passionate about is reducing emissions from mobile sources, because that's going to require limits on freight facility emissions as well. Basically, what we're looking for is a strong indirect source rule in order to achieve both goals. To use a baseball metaphor, it's like making a double play, where you're getting basically killing two birds with one stone. We're also in favor of reducing emissions from stationary sources through the effective use of the best available retrofit control technology requirements. This means actual physical improvements and upgrades to these facilities rather than just paper compliance through the use of credits. But ultimately, in order to make 617, this entire process, most effective, is to really make sure that there's strong, genuine community outreach. And that means engaging, participating, and really empowering the community in order to make sure that these communities feel truly part of this process and have ownership over the improvements being made into their community. Really, we need to make sure that this process includes them as much as possible by working with organizations and constituents directly. Thank you again for your time, and appreciate your opportunity to let us comment here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chavez. Hitting two birds with one stone is the group that we're in may not be a good analogy, man. Just as an FYI. We have the defenders of birds and wildlife here, man. So, man. Yeah. There you go.
Good evening. I'm Bob Terry. I'm with People Over Pollution. It's a grassroots environmental group. I'm also representing Courageous Resistance Movement and the California Green Party, of which I am elected representative. We all take that position. First, I want to say, as far as the monitoring goes, I think you guys are doing a good job. I would have liked to have heard something about testing the playa, laboratory testing, and it should be an ongoing thing as the playa gets exposed. Not all particulate matter is the same. We know that there's DDT out there in the Salton Sea, and we don't even know what else is there. And as it gets exposed, when we can identify it, we may get more help from the state and the federal level if and when we see what's exposed, and your monitors aren't going to tell you that. The groups I mentioned have taken the position that the best way to protect the health of our environment, the health of the people, is through keeping this pollution under the water. To that end, we see as the most feasible way of accomplishing this is the sea-to-sea transfer. Now, a gentleman mentioned earlier that we would need a treaty with Mexico. I've been hearing this for 30 years. Somebody get going on getting this treaty. Start talking to Mexico. Mexico has been coming to us to talk about bringing the water. We're not going there. We need to get going. We need to take some of this 10-year plan money and start engineering in case it's decided that the 10-year plan isn't working and we need to bring water in. We need to start the engineering of bringing water up from the Sea of Cortez, and we should have started it 10 years ago. In fact, the 10-year plan should be complete by now, and we should be on to a permanent plan. Those congratulating themselves on this 10-year plan should take a look at that. This should have already been done. It's been 15 years wasted. Also, very quickly, my own personal feeling on desalination or on geothermal is it can be very, very beneficial, and we should be looking into integrating it with desalination in terms of bringing in seawater. Thank you, and thank you for your work.
Buenas tardes. Yo soy el doctor Jiménez, soy de Mexicali, y un saludo a ustedes, funcionarios públicos del gobierno norteamericano. Nada más dos cosas muy concretas. La número uno, yo soy médico y los pacientes que llegan a Mexicali cada vez están con diferentes tipos de padecimientos y graves. En Mexicali no estamos respirando el cáncer y nos lo estamos comiendo. Estamos respirando veneno. Las geotérmicas sí son un problema. No sé, yo estoy seguro que por asesoría no van a fallar, pero sí son un problema porque yo he visto las malformaciones congénitas en los niños, yo he visto cómo se secan las plantas alrededor de las geotérmicas, los productos químicos que manejan y los derivados de los sulfatos son cancerígenos, los silicios, todo lo que avientan al aire, el agua de sal que sacan y que se van a los mantos freáticos contaminan hacia abajo, de manera que, y más que es una zona sísmica, esos son problemas muy graves para que ustedes piensen en poner más plantas geotérmicas. Claro que aquí se puede decir lo que se tenga que decidir, pero en Mexicali ni siquiera sabemos de quién son esas plantas y quién está ganando el dinero de esas plantas. De manera que es un problema grave. Yo he estado haciendo reportajes. Tenemos una asociación, la Fundación Medio Ambiente Sano en Baja California, y tenemos un programa de radio. Y aparte de eso, en la medicina hay una forma de curar o de mejorar las cosas. Y eso es de tajo. Cuando hay un cáncer hay que sacar todo. Yo sugiero que en las legislaciones norteamericanas y mexicanas se deben de unir para legislar en contra de las empresas que se están instalando 5 o 3 metros bajo el nivel del mar, porque no podemos vivir en ese veneno. Y lo que viene de allá para acá y lo que va para allá es la misma, de manera que debe de prohibirse muchos tipos de empresas que estén en las condiciones en las que está todo este valle. Yo considero que toda la gente que por intereses, y no voy a decir nombres, por intereses, por ignorancia, por lo que sea, dicen que el medio ambiente debe ser como sigue y que no perjudica todo esto, las empresas y todo esto, deben de ser acusados de genocidio, porque sabiendo todo lo que se está provocando, no quieren hacer nada por sus intereses económicos. Esto, gracias. Doctor Daniel Jiménez Ontiveros.
Hi again. My name is Daniel Jiménez Ontiveros, and I am a doctor from Mexicali. And the reason that I've come here today, well, first of all, I want to thank all of you, our public officials from the U.S. government. This is a comment from him.
I think they
Oh, you had translation on the... Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, for the
Did
rest
they
of the
pass out
audience?
the headsets? Okay, please proceed, because there are people in the audience.
Okay.
That don't have
Again, I am a doctor from Mexicali, and I'm here to tell you that our people are suffering from more and more serious ailments. We are breathing and we are eating cancer in Mexicali. And geothermals are part of this issue. I am certain that what we know is accurate. And I know this because I've seen congenital deformations in the children. I've seen how plants dry up around these geothermal plants. The chemicals that they use that are sulfate derivatives are known carcinogens, and all of the air emissions are as well. The water, this brine that they inject into the water table also pollutes our groundwater. And they continue to be injected, and there are very serious issues that should be considered before having more geothermal plants. And of course, you will decide whatever you need to decide. This is the U.S., but at least in Mexicali, we don't even know who owns these geothermals and who's profiting from these. And this is a serious issue, and it should be given its due importance. We have an association in Mexicali called Medio Ambiente Sano, or Healthy Environment in Mexicali, and we host a radio show where we discuss these issues. And in medicine, we've always known that the best way to get rid of the disease is to cut it at the root. If you have cancer, for example, you make sure you remove it all. So I would suggest that the Mexican legislature and U.S. legislators come together and create joint legislation against these businesses that are like geothermal plants that are just a few feet from the border, because it makes little difference whether it's going from there to here or from here to there. We all share the same air. So many types of these companies should be kept from operating and causing the conditions we see throughout the valley. I think that anyone that, due to vested interests, and I'm not going to say any name, but due to vested interests, ignorance, or whatever else, say that it is not harming the environment and that we need to continue with the status quo and continue to allow these companies to operate, should be brought to trial for genocide, because with full knowledge about everything that they're causing, they refuse to do anything about it to protect their economic interests. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Asher Medina. I'm 12 years old, and I have been greatly impacted by pollution since I was 2 years old. So I remember missing many basketball games, many activities that involve outside, and many of my friends also got asthma. So we missed a lot of stuff because of the fields burning. And I remember not being able to breathe while those kind of games and having pain in my chest. I want to be able to play outdoors, and I would like to know which one of you can help with stopping fields of burning. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Astrid Calderas, and I'm a proud mother of 3 boys, 2 of them who suffer from asthma and another one with chronic allergies. I just want to share a little bit about our story. We live a block from public school in Calexico, Cesar Chavez. Yet my children cannot go to school. I had to take a step and decide to enroll them in homeschool to keep them safe from the environmental conditions. Because as you know, they exacerbate their health condition. And while I've been hearing about the Salton Sea and the New River issues, and this might take several years to be solved or to be implemented, perhaps thinking about regulating or prohibiting agricultural burning, as it has been done in other counties, can be immediate solution for the Imperial County residents. There has been several stories that indicate the correlation with ag burning and the particular matter emissions, as Dr. English has done here before. And there's many other more that indicate the correlation with the particular matters and the respiratory and other diseases and health outcomes. So I was wondering if there's anything that we can do for this to be implemented in the Imperial County. I approached the principal last year before deciding to homeschool my kids, and I was asking her if was there something that we can do to help as a community, because by that time they were applying fertilizers around the school. And then she told me that unfortunately this needs to be taken to a higher level, which she meant the federal one, and now taking like the opportunity that some of you are here, I would really like to have some of these answers, knowing that more than 14,000 acres of fields are burned every year and thousands of people have been affected. And I'm glad to hear other alternatives such as Ms. Norma mentioned, and there's other studies of other things that could be done instead of emitting all of this. Our situation is bad enough with the Salton Sea, the New River, the border emissions. So if we focus on the immediate solution within the agricultural activity, we can improve the environment in a shorter period of time and benefit many of the community members. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Mary Helen Dolenti. I am a 64-year-old lifelong Imperial County resident. I've lived on Orchard Road in the small town of Hopeville all 64 years. And I'm here today, first of all, to thank you. I really appreciate the invitation that I was given by your office, Assemblyman Garcia. Thank you so much for that. And I'm glad that I am here because I do have some issues. I do kind of beg to differ a little bit on the geothermal industries. I am full agreement. Our geothermal industries have provided a lot of local employment to our local people, our local citizenry. Whereas when we put in the solar panels, when we put in the windmills, all those were basically out of the county jobs. They came and they went, they're done. Now we have probably, 4 or 5 employees running those plants. As far as the geothermal, I live in Hopeville. We created the first geothermal well, East Mesa, put in the United States. I beg to differ also on the fact that there's black billowing smoke coming out. No, that is steam. That is white steam, pure white steam. And I have seen that all the years that I have lived in Hopeville because I see it. I used to see it. Now I don't see it as much. As far as my own children, my grandchildren, I have 6 grandchildren, and 3 of them do suffer from asthma. And that is, I think, a given. I don't know how we're going to stop pollution here in the valley. It's so persistent. The other day, my husband and I were traveling to El Centro on Interstate 8, and you just saw this massive gray cloud covered the whole valley. I mean, we're talking the north end all the way into our country there to south of us, Mexico. there's no way we can stop it. We can't stop it at the border. We can't stop it anywhere. But I do appreciate all that is done by the Air Resources Board, by the Water Control Board. Mr. Angel, I did want to briefly commentate on the geothermal, when you were saying our regulations here as far as the water resources, the regulations at the state and federal level are put upon their geothermal industry are intense. They're very well regulated. And again, if I heard correctly, we can't control other governments, other countries' regulations. And again, just to say, that industry does employ a lot of local people, and we do need that. This valley is the highest valley of unemployment in the state of California, and we do need those resources. So hopefully, in conjunction with these geothermals, they can provide assistance to the Salton Sea effort in restoring as much as they can to help out there. Also, I wanted to comment, the San Andreas Fault, well, that's been here forever. That's been here way before we even existed. I live on Orchard Road, which is an extension of the SR7, the north extension. I just live right off the freeway. And you want to talk about earthquakes daily? Every time that a semi goes through there, you can sit there or you can stand there in my driveway and feel them coming. It's a bad situation. Nobody ever took the time to look at the logistics of Orchard Road. They don't understand that we have 4 water lines that run across Orchard Road. We have vehicles that are semi-trucks that are coming from across the border because we have that new Eastport, and that has become, they use that corridor, Orchard Road, to specifically get to the 111 and 115 exchange, or to go down Holt Avenue in the middle of town to reach 78 on their way to Blythe. I don't know, I think I'd like to get with you, Mr. Desert, sometime and talk about what we can do to, because my house is right at the stop. And it's slowly, our road was not meant to do that, to handle that type of environment. Anyway, again, thank you so much. And thank you, I want to thank you so much also for giving me so much information in the mail. I really appreciate that. No one has ever done that before. It's great to know that your constituents are getting services that we all need. Thank you again, and have a nice evening.
Hello, my name is Rebecca Zaragoza. I am a policy advocate with the Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. And aside from being based in the Coachella Valley, I also grew up there. A couple of the first panelists talked about community engagement and their supposed success stories thus far. Quite frankly, in my experience working with the eastern communities of the Coachella Valley, residents are not properly informed about the 10-year plan, and those who are not particularly in support of it. So I urge that if you're going to list community outreach and community engagement in your presentations and in your funding applications and boast about that element, then do it right. Do it in a full, continuous, and transparent way, and do it now. Thank you.
My name is Nikita Daryanani. I'm a policy coordinator with Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability as well. So we're based in the eastern Coachella Valley and San Joaquin Valley as well, working with low-income, disadvantaged communities of color. So I'd like to state the importance of rural communities being included in the state strategy, and not just urban cities or communities, but rural unincorporated communities as well. And I think we all at this point understand the importance of plans and strategies to be led by communities that are most impacted by air pollution. So for this reason we urge that community grants be awarded directly to community groups maybe those with experience doing community monitoring so they can conduct their own. And the data resulting should be owned by these communities as well for them to access and use in a way that's meaningful to them. And when selection criteria of communities is being developed, ARB should consider the differences and gaps in data quality and data sources in certain communities, such as rural communities that might have inconsistent data. I think Board Member Takforian mentioned this earlier. And that the selection criteria and process for communities to be selected should be developed and presented in a transparent, clear way for folks to comment publicly on. We also urge that there be a formal engagement process for the community emission reduction plan and to make sure that it's transparent and open from the very beginning so that residents aren't blindsided halfway through by the direction the process is going. When we told residents about this program, one of them, a longtime resident of the city of Fresno, said, well, we go to all these workshops, we go to all of these meetings and give our comment, give feedback, and our air is still unhealthy. So I think it's important for all of us to understand and respect this frustration that residents do have with this process and proactively ensure that communities are not simply engaged, but are driving and leading the process and making the decisions. Like the program that Dr. English and Comité Civico explained earlier. Thanks for your time.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Patricia Leal. And tonight I'm here as a North Shore resident. Those who might not know the area, North Shore is adjacent to the Salton Sea, 5 minutes away in car. I grew up there. That's my community. That's where I call home. I grew up. We were lucky to come and visit the Salton Sea in November when it's not hot and humid. Unfortunately, when it's hot and humid, not only do you see dust or different type of exposures to the result of the Salton Sea, but you also have a strong smell that affects the community. And when you have a strong smell in the community, you cannot be outside, regardless, aside from not knowing what the effects can be, is just not a pleasant feeling to be outside. A lot of our community residents work in the fields, and this odor does reach the field. So you have farm workers working with this odor. So I'm here tonight as a resident that grew up in the North Shore Mecca area, which is a low-income, unincorporated community. I appreciate the fact that you all are here tonight, but it is unfortunate that this has taken so long to come into deciding what the next steps are going to be for our communities. These are low-income, unincorporated communities that unfortunately have had to live through this for so many years. And just highlighting some of the comments mentioned by Rebecca, community residents, specifically talking about North Shore residents, haven't been actively engaged in this process. When you ask people what is the 10-year plan, folks don't know. So what are we doing to make sure that this 10-year plan is being communicated adequately in a transparent and an effective way that residents are able to understand? Nonetheless, ensuring when these workshops, continued workshops, are held in the North Shore Yacht Club or in areas close to the community, we ensure that there's reliable English and Spanish presentations, documents, and translation services provided, which is a basic requirement for community residents to know what the workshop is even about. So I thank for the efforts that are going on, but I think there's a long way to go, and we need to be asking ourselves, how are we engaging community residents in this process? As a resident of North Shore and as a young adult, I do expect for these efforts to be followed through. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Stephanie Tai. I work on climate justice with the California Environmental Justice Alliance. I guess I can move this, huh? Say hi, as most of you know us. I want to echo the comments that my colleagues have just made and really appreciate the panel discussion here today. In particular, I want to respond to a couple of points that Team Garcia made. First, Assembly Member Eduardo Garcia, as you know, we're a statewide alliance. We're community-driven, and we're really would be more than happy and willing to work with you on some follow-up policy ideas, which is, connected to your comments, Assemblymember Cristina Garcia, that we really need to think beyond the monitoring and plans, right? That we appreciate, of course, the intent of 617, but we need to think bigger about more direct emissions reductions and addressing the sources of these air pollution problems, right? On the implementation of 617 itself, we have many pages of recommendations. I'll just lift up a couple of them here tonight. I want to emphasize that CARB should provide really clear, specific, enforceable guidance. We can't rely on the air districts for action and community engagement. It's very important that they have very clear, enforceable, specific guidance. On the community engagement piece, and we really emphasize that CARB should allocate that technical assistance funding to communities and really utilize the existing Cal EPA Environmental Justice Program, which already has very strong ties with environmental justice groups and communities across the state. So once again, I'll just close by saying AB 617 is a real opportunity to rebuild trust with environmental justice communities when other opportunities have been weakened. And provide relief for communities, many of whom we've heard from today, that have been suffering from poor air quality for many decades. And we're very happy to continue this discussion and work collaboratively with you. Thanks.
Buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Manuela Ramírez. Soy del Valle de Coachella. A veces traigo varios sombreros. Representando varias organizaciones. Ahorita vino con líderes campesinas y la Unión Hace la Fuerza. Les quería decir, aprovechando que está Eduardo García, que es el que nos representa en nuestro Valle de Coachella, que si pudiéramos tener más regulaciones en lo que son los quemas de basuras en los ranchos, como poniéndoles multas más altas o algo así, para mitigar un poco lo que es los problemas respiratorios en lo que es alrededor del este del Valle de Coachella. También quería decirles que estoy participando y ayudando a la Unión Hace la Fuerza con los monitores que se están llevando a cabo en el Valle de Coachella en ciertos lugares. Ahorita tenemos 5 monitores, pero quisiera que esto se expandiera, quisiera que estos se hicieran a más lugares. No nomás que sean ciertas partes donde se está poniendo, sino que más lugares, porque nosotros hemos visto con todo lo que hemos hecho como outreach con las comunidades, hemos mirado que ha sido un proyecto muy bueno y bien recibido por las comunidades y la gente quiere saber si se pueden poner más en otros lugares. Es por eso que yo quisiera que esto se expandiera. Muchas gracias.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Daniela Ramirez. I'm from Coachella Valley, and I'm here wearing several hats today, representing several organizations, including Vidas Campesinas and La Unión Hace la Fuerza. And the reason I'm here today, taking advantage of the fact that we have Eduardo Garcia here, who is our representative for Coachella Valley, to see whether we could have more regulations for trash burning in some of these ranchers, perhaps having steeper fines or something like that, so that we can somewhat mitigate the respiratory issues that we suffer in eastern Coachella Valley. I also wanted to say that I have been participating and helping with the community monitoring that is being done in Coachella Valley in certain places. Right now we have 5 monitors, but I would like for that to be expanded. I would like for these to be available in more places, and not only in the limited places where they're at now, because we have seen in the outreach that we've done with the community that has been very well received to have the monitors that we do have. The community is very happy with it, and they want to know whether we could have more monitors elsewhere. And thus I am asking if the program could be expanded. Thank you.
Buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Guadalupe Rosales, directora de la Unión Hace la Fuerza.
Yo solo quiero decirles la importancia que es instalar estos monitores. Yo tengo 2 niños y uno de ellos sufre de alergias. Y quiero informarles que ya estamos llevando a cabo este proyecto en el Valle de Coachella y estamos dispuestas a seguir colaborando contigo, Eduardo García. Gracias.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm the director of La Unión Hace la Fuerza, and I am here just to stress the importance of doing this community monitoring. I have 2 children who suffer from allergies, and we have already been working on some of this in the Coachella Valley, and it's important to expand this program. Thank you.
Good evening, from the looks of it, I'm the last, so I'm sure that's a good thing for everyone. But anyway, my name's Tommy Edwards. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Sunline Transit Agency in the Coachella Valley. And I want to thank both Assembly, Christina and Eduardo, for having me here today. I've really got a good education. I appreciate looking at some of the issues that we share both in the Coachella Valley and the Imperial Valley. The only thing I wanted to mention was that obviously there's many types of pollution that we're dealing with, and there's lots of solutions and things that we have to monitor and look at. One of the things that I've devoted most of my career to in the transportation industry is reducing emissions in mobile resources. So, as you know, Sunline Transit Agency, or you may not know, we've been in alternative fuels for over a quarter of a century. We operate hydrogen fuel cell buses, zero emission buses, battery electric buses, and digester renewable natural gas buses. So I just want to make sure that the Imperial Valley, our sister to the south, we would offer our experiences to them to help bring in some mobile resource and they should be looking at zero emission in this area also. And we appreciate the support from the Air Resources Board and also from CARB for the funding that they've helped us move forward with over the last quarter of a century, and we want to continue that relationship and share with our neighbors to the south. Thank you for your time.
My name is Tony Tirado, resident of Calexico. 2 issues. Number 1, the Salton Sea, quality water. I can remember way back when the farmers were accused of drainage, and supposedly, and I think my friend over here, he can do better than that because he knows very well what happened way back when. He can help me with that. The drainage, they did a correction to it. They did an effort. The farmers did. Okay, we would blame Mexicali for that pollution, which the sewer coming in from Mexicali, but it takes aeration about 20 miles before it dissipates. But anyway, right now I will say the 7 cities of the valley should comply with the water treatment plants under the new direction that the state has to clean it up. I think that should be monitored, number 1. Also, Mexicali, as mentioned the scale here, takes $75 million to correct some of the problems. Okay, now that's going to impact Calexico water quality, the water plant. Because you got Mexicali by itself, it's about 700,000 people. That impact the sewage coming in there. Then I say we Calexico have to pay for that if we don't get the right amount of money to subsidize that cleanliness. The other issue is here in the Imperial Valley, and the lady that talked about her family in Coachella, that's 90-some odd miles away from here. We're here in Calexico. The monitoring, which You explained it very thoroughly, very good. Okay, to monitor that, the PM10, I can tell you right there, you have an example to learn from Imperial Valley, Calexico, to other cities and other states, how to monitor. The quantity of PM10 here in Calexico, I can tell you 12 miles from here, it'll dissipate. Why the impact of Mexicali? 700,000 people, 30,000 people come across every day. We're a population of 40,000, that's 70,000, plus all the vehicles and cars coming in through. There is a pollution here. The thing is, you've done monitoring enough that we need results now to help us with, right now, air pollution, asthma. I mean, as the lady explained it to you, also children born with deficiencies, that's also another factor. So all I'm saying is, gentlemen and ladies, I like your panel. I think I have to thank Mr. Garcia for bringing you to keep us abreast, to keep us informed, number one. And number two, Mr. Johnny Hernandez from Raleigh, in your panel, he did an excellent job representing the valley for us here. That was very clear. And also another gentleman that I know very well, he knows the history. That's Jose Angel from the Water Quality Board of the State of California. He knows very much how the New River and the Salton Sea affects our community. We need your support. We need the help. And I'll tell you one thing, it's going to take a lot of money. It's going to take the county, it's going to take the geothermal, it's going to take the city, the IID, it's going to take the state, it's going to take the feds, and whatever else we can get money from, because it's going to cost a lot of money. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
First of all, my name is Juan Zarate, member of the Steering Committee for Cívico Comité. I personally want to thank you for coming down and spending the whole day and heard the testimony from the citizens of Imperial County. I really, really appreciate your presence. I've been involved in community activities for the past 50 years, and I've never, ever experienced a day like I have spent the last 2 days. And I want to personally thank you for coming down and hearing the testimony of our citizens here in the Valley. I really, really appreciate it. And we do have a serious health problem, water problem, and air problem here in the area, and we need your help. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming down to our Imperial County community who, as we know, suffers from many health effects. You name it, we have it. I do want to share, and I'm speaking for the schools that are not here today, the officials from the county, principals, superintendents. I've been working directly with them for the past maybe 6 years. I hear personal stories that principals, staff, and students are sharing to me on a daily basis. I do want to emphasize the importance of the process of community involvement, the delicate process it takes to really transform something so beneficial, but really make it clear to residents. Our residents were not informed. We still need a lot of education. We've implemented school flag programs, but now we have air monitors. What does that mean to the schools? They had never had somebody come in and had them reduce exposure. Students, up to 2 years ago, were running out when the air quality was maroon on episodes. A state of emergency for Imperial County, and students are still running outside, are still breathing 3 times more than we are. This happened 2 years ago when I started, we Comité Cívico implemented the school flag program. We are still a long ways ahead of reducing exposures to these children that are vulnerable, that are asking for help. They're crying for help when they're going to the emergency room on a daily basis. Now with the Salton Sea issue, it's going to be just catastrophic to all these schools. Just a few weeks ago, Crystal called me from Westmoreland, Calipatria Elementary School. She's got 600 students at the school site. 200 students have asthma. That is maybe, I'm going to say 6 to 10 miles from the Salton Sea. She calls me up. She's like, Esther, what's going on? My flag is flying. It's orange. It's turning to red. We've got all these kids coming in at the same time with allergies. I had never seen so many kids at my office with allergies. I don't have the asthma medications here. Who's going to help these schools? We need more help from our APCD officer, Matt Desert. We cannot implement the school plaque program throughout Imperial County without your help. We need your help. We need you in our office. We need to work together because we need to act now. We're already late. We already have the highest asthma prevalence in the state, right? So this is without the Salton Sea. Now with the Salton Sea, we don't want to look back 10 years from now and say, you know, this could have been unavoidable because we are late. So I'm expressing the need of community involvement, community empowerment, because what happens when you have air monitors but the community doesn't know about them? It really doesn't matter. So if you don't educate these residents that are living the way we did with now no education, it really doesn't matter that you have 20 monitors throughout the county because you know what? They don't know, they're uninformed, and they will not make changes to help themselves and live a healthy life and reduce these exposures. Thank you.
Actually stuck around. Clearly we started a bit late. We've gone a bit late, but all of you who are here certainly demonstrates the commitment that you have to this issue, to your community, and you ought to be commended for that. Second is that I think the public comments is a great opportunity for us to hear directly where our gaps, our deficiencies, and where we need to do more, and where our focus ought to be. And so my commitment is certainly, folks said, there needs to be greater outreach to the education of what this plan means, what it looks like. We certainly commit to doing more of that in the communities that we have mentioned we need to go to as it relates to the implementation of this bill and that Salton Sea plan. Well, without a doubt, we're not going to sit on our hands up at the Capitol or here in the community. We're going to make sure that we implement it in a way that it's addressing both the public health issues as well as the ecosystem needs that have been highlighted today. But we won't be able to do that by ourselves. It's everyone who spoke, everyone who represents an organization, whether it be a nonprofit or a governmental agency, those who sat up here at the dais that spoke on panel 1 or panel 2, and without a doubt, without the support of my colleague and the other 78 colleagues that we have in the Assembly and the 40 senators that we have in the Senate. With that, I know it's gotten late. I just want to truly say thank you to Comité Cívico and all of our partners that actually helped us put this together. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank, of course, the team made up of all of the volunteers, including those in our office that helped put this together. There's a long list of individuals that you get in trouble when you don't name them all, so I won't name any of them. But thank you. You know who you are. And again, thank you very much, those of you who live here. We are committed as you are, and you've demonstrated that this evening. This meeting will now be adjourned, and thank you so much again for your participation.